You fool! Warren is dead. Welcome to HorrorBabble. We've assembled a collection today, focusing on stories told through diary entries. We've always found the journal format to be particularly effective in the spinning of horror yarns. It's the precursor to found footage in many ways, stumbling across a doomed individual's final thoughts in the face of some terrible threat, or the threat they themselves had become, as in the case of The Diary of a Madman, for example. And we'll be kicking the collection off with another take on the journal format, What Killed Grandad, in which the idea of diary horror is explored through a series of audio logs. See the video description for chapter times. We hope you enjoy the collection, folks. Audio log 1, Friday, January 18th, 2002. Hello, I'm Nigel Curwen. This is my diary. Well, audio diary, at least. I'm not really a big fan of talking to the wall, which, to be fair, is what talking into a microphone feels like to me. But I'm on something of a personal quest. I just have to know what killed Grandad. They say he fell, that he was, disorientated, that the Alzheimer's finally bested him. Well, I'm not so sure. When I found him last month, I used to pop round twice a week, work permitting, he was lying face down on the bedroom floor. I have to admit it looked like he'd fallen, stumbled coming out of the bathroom or something. On the way down, he'd hit his head on the corner of the bedside table, which had knocked him out, or, which is probably more likely, killed him instantly. All I know is that there was a lot of blood on the floor, his head, his hands. It was bloody everywhere. And there was a weird smell in the room, an eggy sort of smell, kind of like the smell of a spent match, but a little sweeter, perhaps. I couldn't trace the source of it. Then I heard the radio, the sound of static, whistling away on the floor next to Grandad. It looked as though it had been knocked to the ground as it collided with the bedside table. Anyway, I called an ambulance and waited in the kitchen for them to arrive. Later, when the paramedics entered Grandad's bedroom and turned him over, Jesus, half of his face was missing, from his chin up to his nose, peeled back like a banana skin. I didn't really get a good look, to be honest. The paramedics hauled him away and, well, that was that. The coroner deduced that the avulsion was a result of the fall, that his fragile skin was easily torn. Snagged on the bedside table, someone said. What the hell? Doesn't explain the fact that blood was found under his fingernails. Yeah, excuse me. Grandad, my mum's dad, was 86 years old at the time of his death. The Alzheimer's had been diagnosed just 5 years earlier. He'd taken the news well to begin with, insisting that it was just the way of the universe, and that he'd make his peace with it and get on with living what was left of his life. He was like that, Grandad. Grandma was long gone. In fact, she'd died long before I was born, so I'd only ever had the one grandparent. My dad's parents had died when he was just a boy. So let me talk about the origin of my suspicions concerning Grandad's death. In those final years, as that debilitating disease took hold of him, Grandad lost touch with the present. Mentally, he regressed by years, it seemed, almost every day. He saw electrical items around the house as foreign objects, gadgets beyond his comprehension. And as a result, thanks to a lifetime of tinkering, he was an engineer in his working years, he developed the habit of disassembling certain things in a futile effort to figure them out. Every week you'd find him in the presence of something he pulled apart. The microwave, the intercom, the television, the VCR. If he could get his hands on it, he'd break it down, piece by piece. Trouble was, obviously, he hadn't a clue how to put any of it back together. I swear to God, every last piece of equipment he owned went the way of Humpty Dumpty before the end. However, in the case of the radio that had been lying next to him on the floor, he'd evidently taken it apart and managed, of a fashion, to put it back together again. I say of a fashion, because its outer casing was still missing, and I couldn't be sure that all of its electrical components were accounted for. But he must have done a decent enough job for it to be droning away next to his corpse like that. To describe the radio, it was a simple 3-band radio/tape recorder, about the size of your average shoebox, for lack of a better comparison. The main elements were intact: antenna, tuner, tape deck, speaker. But here's where it gets weird. I couldn't shake the idea that perhaps Grandad hadn't fallen at all, that instead he deliberately flung himself towards the bedside table, scrambling to switch that radio off for some reason or other. Anyway, I've no idea why I felt so strongly that that was the case, but as I said, I couldn't shake it. So I scooped the radio up, bit by bit, and brought it home. And here I am, a month after his death, just a 10-minute stroll from Grandad's house, in a quiet spot on Lord Street, just off Manchester Road. This is my base of operations, as it were, here in the study. I call it the study, though in actual fact it's just the second bedroom on the first floor. It's at the back of the house, overlooking the old school. It's a little creepy back here after dark, especially with the curtains open. I'm surrounded by dusty books and old magazines, bit of a collector. But it's a good environment for tinkering. Grandad said so himself once. I finally set the radio up today. It's here in front of me. Spent the afternoon messing with the tuner. Couldn't pick anything up at first. Just static. I persisted with it though, turning the tuning knob very slowly, marginally, till, at last, some sort of transmission was received. This was 9:01 p.m, I have to add. I couldn't make anything out clearly, but I could tell that there was a voice under all the static. Perhaps a number of voices. Grandad's tinkering had deprived the radio of a headphone socket, so I decided to pop a tape in there to record the noise, and to later digitize it for closer inspection. At around 9:10, I managed to record 5 minutes worth of garbled noise. My main cassette deck is rigged up to my workstation here in the study, so the digitization was pretty straightforward. I pulled the recording up in my wave editor and started messing with a couple of noise filters, EQ, etc. After an hour or so of processing and reprocessing, I was able to cancel out a good deal of the noise and was left with what might just pass for a voice. Yeah. Anyway, this is it. Tape recording number 1. Not much to work with, is there? The radio isn't digital, so it's hard to say precisely what frequency I'd landed on in order to receive the transmission. However, what I can say is that the voice I recorded carried on jabbering for another 20 minutes or so after I stopped recording. During those 20 minutes, by way of comparison, I tried to match the frequency on the two digital radios I have here at home, somewhere between 99.5 and 100 MHz FM. But despite my efforts, it seemed that only Grandad's radio was able to receive the transmission. Anyway, I'm going to attempt to refine the signal further. Perhaps I'll receive the same thing again tomorrow. If so, I'll need to improve my recordings somehow. There's something in this, I'm sure of it. Something to do with Grandad's death. Anyway, that's it for tonight. More tomorrow. Nigel out. Okay, there we go again. Audio log 2, January 19th, 2002. Hello again, Nigel here. Getting really weird now, this. In my efforts to improve the signal, I moved the radio up to the attic. I've got a clear view of the sky through a roof window up there, so I set the radio up just below it and angled the antenna towards the open air. I checked in on the radio every hour or so throughout the day, and was chuffed to bits when at last the transmission began again. Woohoo! At precisely 8:57 p.m. this was. Thanks to the radio's new position in the attic, the signal was vastly improved, so I continued to work the antenna till I was sure the reception was the best it could be. Again, I recorded a good 10 minutes worth of noise and returned to my workstation downstairs in order to digitize the recording. And here I am, an hour later. Oop-de-doo. A bit of digital manipulation has resulted in a cleaner recording, revealing the odd word here and there, spoken by what I'm assuming is the same voice I heard yesterday. For all I know, it could be a completely different voice, but there's just something about it that tells me it's the same. And although there's no way to be sure what's being said, there's definitely something, I don't know, troubling about the speaker. Something that makes me uncomfortable. The kind of thing that if Grandad had been exposed to in his deteriorating condition, he might have felt uncomfortable too. I'm obsessed already. Anyway, blah, 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 blah. I'm just going to play the damn thing. Here it is. Tape recording number 2. I can make out the words menace and flesh. Weird, eh? Anyway, I'm going to listen out for it again tomorrow. I'm not sure when the transmission ended tonight. I was too busy down here working on the recording. With any luck, it'll kick off around 9ish again. I'm getting somewhere with all this, I know it. Got to figure it out. Got to figure it out for Grandad. Anyway, Nigel out. Audio log number 3, January 20th, 2002. I'm onto something. Rinse, repeat, and you shall reap results, I heard someone say once. Was that just a voice in my head? I don't know. In any case, the radio reception improved again this evening. I'm not sure if the weather's playing a part in all this. I mean, I'm no expert, but I assume it does. It's been incredibly calm outside today. Anyway, at 8:59 p.m. on the dot, the transmission started up again. The reception was so clear that I could hear plain as day what was being said. I was recording from the off this time and managed to capture a good 5 minutes of audio before the crappy tape deck did a number on the cassette inside. Chewed the bugger up, it did. Anyway, I whipped it out and took it downstairs. I missed the end of the transmission, but was able to salvage most of the tape. All the while I was rescuing it, I could hear that voice droning away above me. I think it ceased just after 9:20 p.m. Cassette repaired, I popped it into my reliable deck and digitized it. Ended up with a couple of minutes of audio. The chewed portions of tape were irredeemable. Despite the vast reception improvement, which had resulted in a fairly decent recording, I figured it was still worth trying to improve it on the computer. In situations like this, you can never be sure what else might have been recorded. Hidden sounds and tones only a graphic equalizer can reveal. So here it is, the voice that's beginning to sound to me like it belongs to the nemesis of a superhero in some low-budget fantasy movie. Blimey, it's all very strange, this. Anyway, this is tape recording number 3.
To those who listen, those who inquire, those who invite, I need not introduce myself, but I like to say my name. Moot is my name. Moot. Moot I am. The Shadow King, the lurking menace, the bringer of the end. I am stripped of flesh, waiting, ever so patiently waiting, stripped of being, waiting, patiently waiting, disembodied, listening, always listening. An invitation I await, an invitation to that place, that darkest of places, the place behind the face. For the face is but a mask, beneath it a space reserved for Moot. I'll feast upon your secrets, bathe in your lies. I'll feed upon your fear, your hate, that which you despise. And when I'm inside, safely within, Moot will come out from beneath. Moot will command, you will obey. I live in the strong, live in the brave, not in the weak, not in the frail. Moot is the way, the hidden one, the keeper of fate. I hear you, listener. I turn to you and say, open the gate.
Weird, eh? Weird. Weird is too tame a word, I reckon. Moot, the voice keeps repeating. Who the hell is Moot? What could it mean? Did Grandad make contact with something? I'm getting closer, I can feel it. But I've got to get some rest, need to think. I'll reevaluate tomorrow. Tired. Nigel out. Audio log number 4, January 21st, 2002. Nigel here. It's just after 2 p.m. I went down the library this morning, first time in a long time. Browsed at random. I've no frame of reference, no context. On a whim, I had a word with one of the librarians. Moot, I said. Moot the Shadow King. Moot the Hidden One. Does that mean anything to you? No, was the reply. How helpful's that? Anyway, I must have looked like a lunatic, wandering from shelf to shelf, mumbling to myself, Moot, 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 over and over again. Jesus Christ. I wonder what had happened if I looked in the mirror and said it 5 times. Probably end up with no face. Anyway, it's still early. Better get set up for later. Got a coffee here to finish as well. Anyway, Nigel out. Audio log number 5, January 21st, 2002. Nigel here, again. It's just gone 9:30 p.m. I'm back in the study. I'm a little spooked, to tell you the truth. Well, I went up to the attic, turned the radio on, set the antenna, etc. This was about 8:55, by the way, and immediately, and I mean literally instantly here, that voice came at me. And when I say it came at me, it was actually addressing me personally. Luckily, I'd set the tape recording at precisely the same moment the transmission was received. Trouble is, I was so spooked that I killed the recording after a minute or so. I just couldn't listen to it. That voice and the reception was so ridiculously clear, unbelievably clear. It's like the radio's been primed somehow, fine-tuned. I'm going to digitize the recording in a few minutes. I'm just necking some coffee at the moment. I'm just a little bit overwhelmed with it all. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know what to say. I mean, I was expecting to hear a repetition of that earlier transmission, not some verbal onslaught. Anyway. Come on, Nigel, get a hold of yourself, for God's sake. More coffee. Anyway, that's it for now. Going. Nigel out. Audio log 6, January 21st, 2002. Okay, it's still Monday, coming up to 10:30 p.m. I have to tell you, listening back to that was pretty unnerving. I'm still spooked. And something else, something I forgot to mention earlier. As soon as I heard it, the voice, I could smell something eggy, that same sulphur-sweet whiff that surrounded Grandad's body. What's happening here? You'll have to forgive me for rambling. Well, whoever you are listening to this now. Perhaps it's just me listening. That's you, Nigel, that's you. Well, I'd better cut to the chase. Here's tonight's recording. Tape recording number 4.
You? I see you. That's right. I've been waiting for you. Waiting patiently. I've been watching. I know you can hear me, boy. Down there, down below. I know you can hear my words. I'm close, boy. Oh, so close. Would you like to see, boy? Would you like to see my face? The face of he who is coming for you? Seek out your reflection. Gaze into his eyes, boy. Gaze into his eyes. Then take off the mask. Strip it to the bone. Take off...
Jesus, it makes the hairs on the back of my neck stand on end. Oh my God. Well, that's where I stopped the recording. I just couldn't listen anymore. I just couldn't listen. I know it's probably just a radio show or something, but I don't know. You know when you get that feeling? The feeling that you just know something. Like when someone has their eyes on you. The feeling you're being watched. It's inexplicable, isn't it? Impossible to put into words, but it's real. It's a tangible sensation. Well, that's what this is. Even now, knowing full well that radio is switched off up there in the attic, I can feel eyes on me. I can feel them watching. Oh, God. Oh, I'd call it a prank. I could really get on board with the idea that someone I know might be capable of going to such extremes to frighten me. It's just not likely. Not likely at all. Seek out your reflection, it said. Well, I went to the bathroom 10 minutes ago, caught a glimpse of myself in the mirror, and there was something not right about it. In truth, I felt that my face was just a mask. Weird. That's enough for one night. Nigel out. Audio log number 7, January 22nd, 2002. Hello, Nigel here. Well, it's 9:45 p.m. I skipped tonight's transmission. The whole thing has crawled under my skin. I worry about what happened to Grandad, but perhaps I'm tempting a similar fate for myself by pursuing this weird line of inquiry. I'm just your average run-of-the-mill nobody caught up in something beyond my comprehension. I feel like Grandad must have felt in those final years, confused, incapable of rational thought. It's frightening to think how close we are at any one time to losing it, going over the edge. But there's just something about this whole thing that keeps on hammering away at my little head, like something's trying to get in there, or trying to get out, as the case may be. I sent an email to a friend of mine this afternoon, Cody. My circle of friends is pretty small, but if you asked me to identify our ringleader, I'd nominate Cody. He's smart, that one. New Scientist subscriber. Where I'd stash pornography, he's hoarding a collection of Omni magazines from 1989. Or 1980, whatever. No offense, Cody. As I was saying, he's smart, well-read. So I broke it all down for him this afternoon. Grandad, the disassembling, reassembling, the radio, the supposed fall that killed him, the transmissions, the voice, Moot, the smell, the weird face in the mirror. I figured he might be able to explain it, or at least to talk some sense into me. Like I say, that guy knows his stuff. And of course, he replied in his own inimitable way, as expected. I'll read the email. Here we go. Nigel, witticism mode engaged. My thoughts are that your grandfather's exploratory pursuits have yielded results hitherto unprecedented on this eosphere. It sounds to me as though Curwen Sr., unwittingly of course, succeeded in establishing for himself a link to something that resides beyond our plane of existence, an occupant of another dimension perhaps. It's entirely possible that said link served as an invitation, prompting the fear-hungry tenant of that distant realm to rush forth across the dimensional border in order to feast upon the flesh of an old codger. That, or to take possession of his body. Witticism mode disengaged. Seriously, what the bleep? Cody. There you have it. And yeah, he actually typed bleep. He thinks he's being funny, but I can't help but think he's being right. That's all for now. Nigel out. Audio log 8, January 23rd, 2002. Hello, Nigel here. It's 8:50 p.m. It's windy outside, as you can probably hear. It's all change here tonight. I'm in the attic, sat opposite the radio and my recording equipment. There'll be no cassette recording tonight. This is a live recording. I've hooked Grandad's radio up to my workstation through an external interface, and as such, any transmissions received tonight will be recorded in real time, alongside whatever I might want to jabber on about into the mic. My coffee here too. Where would I be without my coffee? I'm just sitting here. I'm a little nervous, to be honest. Holding my nerve, I suppose you could say. I spent the whole day musing over Cody's not-so-hilarious email. I called him earlier. I said, "You can't have just made all that stuff up, can you? I mean, there had to be some truth in there, didn't there?" To which he responded, "Well, you know what they say, Nige. Truth is stranger than fiction." Which leaves me where exactly? Sitting here in the chilly attic, staring at a busted radio, contemplating the strange death of my Grandad, preparing to go head-to-head with a what? What was it Cody said? An occupant of another dimension? I listened to the recordings again earlier. All of them. Moot, I am. The Shadow King. The lurking menace, the bringer of the end. The face is but a mask. Beneath it a space reserved for Moot. Seek out your reflection. Gaze into his eyes, boy. Gaze into his eyes, then take off the mask. Strip it to the bone. Grandad, you've got a lot to answer for. Well, it's coming up to 8:55. Here goes. I don't appear to be picking anything up. But I have to tell you, that smell. Sulphur, fresh fruit, sweet, sickly sweet. Oh man, what is that?
I'm coming for you.
Whoa, whoa, whoa! What is it? I think this is it, ladies and gents. Whatever it is, it's coming for me. It wants me for some reason. And though I've no idea what that reason could be, I think we've finally learned what
Killed Grandad. Time to take off this mask.
The Diary of Alonzo Typer by H.P. Lovecraft and William Lumley. Editor's note. Alonzo Hasbrook Typer of Kingston, New York, was last seen and recognized on April 17, 1908, around noon, at the Hotel Richmond in Batavia. He was the only survivor of an ancient Ulster County family, and was 53 years old at the time of his disappearance. Mr. Typer was educated privately and at Columbia and Heidelberg universities. All his life was spent as a student, the field of his researches including many obscure and generally feared borderlands of human knowledge. His papers on vampirism, ghouls, and poltergeist phenomena were privately printed after rejection by many publishers. He resigned from the Society for Psychical Research in 1902 after a series of peculiarly bitter controversies. At various times Mr. Typer travelled extensively, sometimes dropping out of sight for long periods. He is known to have visited obscure spots in Nepal, India, Tibet, and Indochina, and passed most of the year 1899 on mysterious Easter Island. The extensive search for Mr. Typer after his disappearance yielded no results, and his estate was divided among distant cousins in New York City. The diary herewith presented was allegedly found in the ruins of a large country house near Attica, New York, which had borne a curiously sinister reputation for generations before its collapse. The edifice was very old, antedating the general white settlement of the region, and had formed the home of a strange and secretive family named Vanderhale, which had migrated from Albany in 1746 under a curious cloud of witchcraft suspicion. The structure probably dated from about 1760. Of the history of the Vanderhales, very little is known. They remained entirely aloof from their normal neighbors, employed Negro servants brought directly from Africa and speaking little English, and educated their children privately and at European colleges. Those of them who went out into the world were soon lost to sight, though not before gaining evil repute for association with black mass groups and cults of even darker significance. Around the dreaded house, a straggling village arose, populated by Indians and later by renegades from the surrounding country, which bore the dubious name of Karazin. Of the singular hereditary strains which afterward appeared in the mixed Karazin villages, several monographs have been written by ethnologists. Just behind the village, and in sight of the Vanderhale house, is a steep hill crowned with a peculiar ring of ancient standing stones, which the Iroquois always regarded with fear and loathing. The origin and nature of the stones, whose date, according to archaeological and climatological evidence, must be fabulously early, is a problem still unsolved. From about 1795 onward, the legends of the incoming pioneers and later population have much to say about strange cries and chants proceeding at certain seasons from Karazin and from the great house and hill of Standing Stones, though there is reason to suppose that the noises ceased about 1872, when the entire Vanderhale household, servants and all, suddenly and simultaneously disappeared. Thenceforward the house was deserted, for other disastrous events, including 3 unexplained deaths, 5 disappearances, and 4 cases of sudden insanity, occurred when later owners and interested visitors attempted to stay in it. The house, village, and extensive rural areas on all sides reverted to the state and were auctioned off in the absence of discoverable Vanderhale heirs. Since about 1890, the owners, successively the late Charles A. Shields and his son Oscar S. Shields of Buffalo, have left the entire property in a state of absolute neglect, and have warned all inquirers not to visit the region. Of those known to have approached the house during the last 40 years, most were occult students, police officers, newspaper men, and odd characters from abroad. Among the latter was a mysterious Eurasian probably from Cochin China, whose later appearance with blank mind and bizarre mutilations excited wide press notice in 1903. Mr. Typer's diary, a book about 6 by 3.5 inches in size, with tough paper and an oddly durable binding of thin sheet metal, was discovered in the possession of one of the decadent Khorasan villagers on November the 16th, 1935, by a state policeman sent to investigate the rumored collapse of the deserted Vanderhale mansion. The house had indeed fallen, obviously from sheer age and decrepitude, in the severe gale of November the 12th. Disintegration was peculiarly complete, and no thorough search of the ruins could be made for several weeks. John Eagle, the swarthy, simian-faced, Indian-like villager who had the diary, said that he found the book quite near the surface of the debris, in what must have been an upper front room. Very little of the contents of the house could be identified, though an enormous and astonishingly solid brick vault in the cellar, whose ancient iron door had to be blasted open because of the strangely figured and perversely tenacious lock, remained intact and presented several puzzling features. For one thing, the walls were covered with still undeciphered hieroglyphs, roughly incised in the brickwork. Another peculiarity was a huge circular aperture in the rear of the vault, blocked by a cave-in evidently caused by the collapse of the house. But strangest of all was the apparently recent deposit of some fetid, slimy, pitch-black substance on the flagstone floor, extending in a yard-broad, irregular line with one end at the blocked, circular aperture. Those who first opened the vault declared that the place smelled like the snake house at a zoo. The diary, which was apparently designed solely to cover an investigation of the dreaded Vanderhale house by the vanished Mr. Typer, has been proved by handwriting experts to be genuine. The script shows signs of increasing nervous strain as it progresses toward the end, in places becoming almost illegible. Khorasan villagers, whose stupidity and taciturnity baffle all students of the region and its secrets, admit no recollection of Mr. Typer as distinguished from other rash visitors to the dreaded house. The text of the diary is here given verbatim and without comment. How to interpret it, and what, other than the writer's madness, to infer from it, the reader must decide for himself. Only the future can tell what its value may be in solving a generation-old mystery. It may be remarked that genealogists confirm Mr. Typer's belated memory in the matter of Adrian Slett. The Diary. April 17th, 1908. Arrived here about 6 p.m. Had to walk all the way from Attica in the teeth of an oncoming storm, for no one would rent me a horse or rig, and I can't run an automobile. This place is even worse than I'd expected, and I dread what is coming, even though I long at the same time to learn the secret. All too soon will come the night, the old Valpurgis Sabbath horror, and after that time in Wales I know what to look for. Whatever comes, I shall not flinch. Prodded by some unfathomable urge, I have given my whole life to the quest of unholy mysteries. I came here for nothing else, and will not quarrel with fate. It was very dark when I got here, though the sun had by no means set. The storm clouds were the densest I'd ever seen, and I could not have found my way but for the lightning flashes. The village is a hateful little backwater, and its few inhabitants no better than idiots. One of them saluted me in a queer way, as if he knew me. I could see very little of the landscape, just a small, swampy valley of strange brown weed stalks and dead fungi surrounded by scraggly, evilly twisted trees with bare boughs. But behind the village is a dismal-looking hill on whose summit is a circle of great stones, with another stone at the center. That, without question, is the vile primordial thing I was told about. The great house lies in the midst of a park, all overgrown with curious-looking briars. I could scarcely break through, and when I did, the vast age and decrepitude of the building almost stopped me from entering. The place looked filthy and diseased, and I wondered how so leprous a bulk could hang together. It is wooden, and though its original lines are hidden by a bewildering tangle of wings added at various dates, I think it was first built in the square colonial fashion of New England. Probably that was easier to build than a Dutch stone house, and then, too, I recall that Dirk van der Heyl's wife was from Salem, a daughter of the unmentionable Abaddon Corey. There was a small pillared porch, and I got under it just as the storm burst. It was a fiendish tempest, black as midnight, with rain in sheets, thunder and lightning like the day of general dissolution, and a wind that actually clawed at me. The door was unlocked, so I took out my electric torch and went inside. Dust was inches thick on floor and furniture, and the place smelled like a mold-caked tomb. There was a hall reaching all the way through, and a curving staircase on the right. I ploughed a way upstairs and selected this front room to camp out in. The whole place seems fully furnished, though most of the furniture is breaking down. This is written at 8 o'clock, after a cold meal from my travelling case. After this, the village people will bring me supplies, though they won't agree to come any closer than the ruins of the park gate until, as they say, later. I wish I could get rid of an unpleasant feeling of familiarity with this place. Later. I am conscious of several presences in this house. One in particular is decidedly hostile toward me, a malevolent will which is seeking to break down my own and overcome me. I must not countenance this for an instant, but must use all my forces to resist it. It is appallingly evil and definitely non-human. I think it must be allied to powers outside Earth, powers in the spaces behind time and beyond the universe. It towers like a colossus, bearing out what is said in the Aklo writings. There is such a feeling of vast size connected with it that I wonder these chambers can contain its bulk, and yet it has no visible bulk. Its age must be unutterably vast, shockingly, indescribably so. April 18th. Slept very little last night. At 3 a.m., a strange, creeping wind began to pervade the whole region, ever rising until the house rocked as if in a typhoon. As I went down the staircase to see to the rattling front door, the darkness took half-visible forms in my imagination. Just below the landing, I was pushed violently from behind. By the wind, I suppose, though I could have sworn I saw the dissolving outlines of a gigantic black paw as I turned quickly about. I did not lose my footing, but safely finished the descent and shot the heavy bolt of the dangerously shaking door. I had not meant to explore the house till dawn, yet now, unable to sleep again and fired with mixed terror and curiosity, I felt reluctant to postpone my search. With my powerful torch, I ploughed through the dust to the great south parlour, where I knew the portraits would be. They were there, just as I was told, and as I seemed to know from some obscurer source as well. Some were so blackened, mouldy, and dust-clouded that I could make little or nothing of them, but from those I could trace, I recognized that they were indeed of the hateful line of the Van der Heyls. Some of the paintings seemed to suggest faces I had known, but just what faces I could not recall. The outlines of that frightful hybrid Eurus, spawned in 1773 by old Dirk's youngest daughter, were clearest of all, and I could trace the green eyes and the serpent look in his face. Every time I shut off the flashlight, that face would seem to glow in the dark, until I half fancied it shone with a faint, greenish light of its own. The more I looked, the more evil it seemed, and I turned away to avoid hallucinations of changing expression. But that to which I turned was even worse. The long dour face, small closely set eyes, and swine-like features identified it at once, even though the artist had striven to make the snout look as human as possible. This is what I had heard about. As I stared in horror, I thought the eyes took on a reddish glow, and for a moment the background seemed replaced by an alien and seemingly irrelevant scene. a lone bleak moor beneath a dirty yellow sky, whereon grew a wretched-looking blackthorn bush. Fearing for my sanity, I rushed from that accursed gallery to the dust-cleared corner upstairs, where I have my camp. Later. Decided to explore some of the labyrinthine wings of the house by daylight. I cannot get lost, for my footprints are distinct in the ankle-deep dust, and I can trace other identifying marks when necessary. It is curious how easily I learn the intricate windings of the corridors. Followed a long, outflung northerly L to its extremity, and came to a locked door, which I forced. Beyond was a very small room, quite crowded with furniture, and with the panelling badly worm-eaten. On the outer wall I spied a black space behind the rotting woodwork, and discovered a narrow secret passage leading downward to unknown black depths. It was a steeply inclined chute or tunnel without steps or handholds, and I wondered what its use could have been. Above the fireplace was a mouldy painting, which I found on close inspection to be that of a young woman in the dress of the late 18th century. The faces of classic beauty, yet with the most fiendishly evil expression which I have ever known the human countenance to bear. Not merely callousness, greed, and cruelty, but some quality hideous beyond human comprehension seems to sit upon those finely carved features. And as I looked, it seemed to me that the artist, or the slow processes of mould and decay, had imparted to that pallid complexion a sickly greenish cast, and the least suggestion of an almost imperceptibly scaly texture. Later, I ascended to the attic, where I found several chests of strange books, many of utterly alien aspect, in letters and in physical form alike. One contained variants of the Aclo formulae which I had never known to exist. I have not yet examined the books on the dusty shelves downstairs. April 19th. There are certainly unseen presences here, even though the dust as yet bears no footprints but my own. Cut a path through the briars yesterday to the park gate where my supplies are left, but this morning I found it closed. Very odd, since the bushes are hardly stirring with spring sap. Again, I had that feeling of something at hand so colossal that the chambers can scarcely contain it. This time I feel more than one of the presences is of such a size, and I know now that the third Aclo ritual which I found in that book in the attic yesterday would make such beings solid and visible. Whether I shall dare to try this materialization remains to be seen. The perils are great. Last night I began to glimpse evanescent shadow faces and forms in the dim corners of the halls and chambers, faces and forms so hideous and loathsome that I dare not describe them. They seem allied in substance to that titanic paw which tried to push me down the stairs night before last, and must of course be phantoms of my disturbed imagination. What I am seeking would not be quite like these things. I have seen the paw again, sometimes alone and sometimes with its mate, but I have resolved to ignore all such phenomena. Early this afternoon I explored the cellar for the first time, descending by a ladder found in a storeroom since the wooden steps had rotted away. The whole place is a mass of nitrous encrustations, with amorphous mounds marking the spots where various objects have disintegrated. At the farther end is a narrow passage, which seems to extend under the northerly L, where I found the little locked room, and at the end of this is a heavy brick wall with a locked iron door. Apparently belonging to a vault of some sort, this wall and door bear evidences of 18th century workmanship, and must be contemporary with the oldest additions to the house, clearly pre-revolutionary. On the lock, which is obviously older than the rest of the ironwork, are engraved certain symbols which I cannot decipher. I had not been told about this vault. It fills me with a greater disquiet than anything else I have seen, for every time I approach it I have an almost irresistible impulse to listen for something. Hitherto no untoward sounds have marked my stay in this malign place. As I left the cellar, I wished devoutly that the steps were still there. My progress up the ladder seemed maddeningly slow. I do not want to go down there again, and yet some evil genius urges me to try it at night, if I would learn what is to be learned. April 20th. I have sounded the depths of horror, only to be made aware of still lower depths. Last night, the temptation was too strong, and in the black small hours I descended once more into that nitrous, hellish cellar with my flashlight, tiptoeing among the amorphous heaps to that terrible brick wall and locked door. I made no sound, and refrained from whispering any of the incantations I knew, but I listened with mad intentness. At last I heard the sounds from beyond those barred plates of sheet iron, the menacing padding and muttering as of gigantic night things within. Then, too, there was a damnable slithering, as of a vast serpent or sea beast dragging its monstrous folds over a paved floor. Nearly paralyzed with fright, I glanced at the huge rusty lock and at the alien cryptic hieroglyphs graven upon it. There were signs I could not recognize, and something in their vaguely mongoloid technique hinted at a blasphemous and indescribable antiquity. At times I fancied I could see them glowing with a greenish light. I turned to flee, but found that vision of the Titan pause before me, the great talons seeming to swell and become more tangible as I gazed. Out of the cellar's evil blackness they stretched, with shadowy hints of scaly wrists beyond them, and with a waxing, malignant will guiding their horrible gropings. Then I heard from behind me, within that abominable vault, a fresh burst of muffled reverberations which seemed to echo from far horizons like distant thunder. Impelled by this greater fear, I advanced toward the shadowy pores with my flashlight, and saw them vanish before the full force of the electric beam. Then up the ladder I raced, torch between my teeth, nor did I rest till I had regained my upstairs camp. What is to be my ultimate end, I dare not imagine. I came as a seeker, but now I know that something is seeking me. I could not leave if I wished. This morning I tried to go to the gate for my supplies, but found the briars twisted tightly in my path. It was the same in every direction, behind and on all sides of the house. In places the brown, barbed vines had uncurled to astonishing heights, forming a steel-like hedge against my egress. The villagers are connected with all this. When I went indoors, I found my supplies in the great front hall, though without any clue to how they came there. I am sorry now that I swept the dust away. I shall scatter some more and see what prints are left. This afternoon I read some of the books in the great shadowy library at the rear of the ground floor, and formed certain suspicions which I cannot bear to mention. I had never seen the text of narcotic manuscripts or of the Eltdown shards before, and would not have come here had I known what they contain. I believe it is too late now, for the awful Sabbath is only 10 days away. It is for that night of horror that they are saving me. April 21st. I have been studying the portraits again. Some have names attached, and I noticed one of an evil-faced woman painted some 2 centuries ago, which puzzled me. It bore the name of Trintje van der Heel Slet, and I have a distinct impression that I once met the name of Slet before, in some significant connection. It was not horrible then, though it becomes so now. I must rack my brain for the clue. The eyes of these pictures haunt me. Is it possible that some of them are emerging more distinctly from their shrouds of dust and decay and mold? A serpent-faced and swine-faced warlock stare horribly at me from their blackened frames, and a score of other hybrid faces are beginning to peer out of shadowy backgrounds. There is a hideous look of family resemblance in them all, and that which is human is more horrible than that which is non-human. I wish they reminded me less of other faces, the faces I've known in the past. They were an accursed line, and Cornelius of Leyden was the worst of them. It was he who broke down the barrier after his father had found that other key. I am sure that I was told only a fragment of the horrible truth, so that I am indeed unprepared and defenceless. What of the line before old Klaus? What he did in 1591 could never have been done without generations of evil heritage or some link with the outside. And what of the branches this monstrous line has sent forth? Are they scattered over the world, all awaiting their common heritage of horror? I must recall the place where I once so particularly noticed the name of Slet. I wish I could be sure that these pictures stay always in their frames. For several hours now I have been seeing momentary presences like the earlier paws and shadow faces and forms, but closely duplicating some of the ancient portraits. Somehow, I can never glimpse a presence in the portrait it resembles at the same time. The light is always wrong for one or the other, or else the presence and the portrait are in different rooms. Perhaps, as I have hoped, the presences are mere figments of imagination, but I cannot be sure now. Some are female, and of the same hellish beauty as the picture in the little locked room. Some are like no portrait I have seen, yet make me feel that their painted features lurk unrecognized beneath the mould and soot of canvases I cannot decipher. A few, I desperately fear, have approached materialization in solid or semi-solid form, and some have a dreadful and unexplained familiarity. There is one woman who in fell loveliness excels all the rest. Her poisonous charms are like a honeyed flower growing on the brink of hell. When I look at her closely, she vanishes, only to reappear later. Her face has a greenish cast, and now and then I fancy I can spy a suspicion of the squamous in its smooth texture. Who is she? Is she that being who must have dwelt in the little locked room a century or more ago? My supplies were again left in the front hall. That, clearly, is to be the custom. I had sprinkled dust about to catch footprints, but this morning the whole hall was swept clean by some unknown agency. April 22nd. This has been a day of horrible discovery. I explored the cobwebbed attic again, and found a carved, crumbling chest, plainly from Holland, full of blasphemous books and papers far older than any hitherto encountered here. There was a Greek Necronomicon, a Norman-French Livre d'Ibon, and a first edition of old Ludwig Prinz de Vermis Mysterious. But the old bound manuscript was the worst. It was in Low Latin, and full of the strange, crabbed handwriting of Klaus van der Heel, being evidently the diary or notebook kept by him between 1560 and 1580. When I unfastened the black and silver clasp and opened the yellowed leaves, a coloured drawing fluttered out, the likeness of a monstrous creature resembling nothing so much as a squid, beaked and tentacled, with great yellow eyes, and with certain abominable approximations to the human form in its contours. I had never before seen so utterly loathsome and nightmarish a form. On the paws, feet, and head tentacles were curious claws, reminding me of the colossal shadow shapes which have groped so horribly in my path, while the entity as a whole sat upon a great throne-like pedestal, inscribed with unknown hieroglyphs of vaguely Chinese cast. About both writing and image there hung an air of sinister evil, so profound and pervasive that I could not think it the product of any one world or age. Rather must that monstrous shape be a focus for all the evil in unbounded space throughout the eons past and to come, and those eldritch symbols be vile, sentient icons endowed with a morbid life of their own and ready to wrest themselves from the parchment for the reader's distraction. To the meaning of that monster and of those hieroglyphs I had no clue, but I knew that both had been traced with a hellish precision, and for no nameable purpose. As I studied the leering characters, their kinship to the symbols on that ominous lock in the cellar became more and more manifest. I left the picture in the attic, for never could sleep come to me with such a thing nearby. All the afternoon and evening I read in the manuscript book of old Klaus van der Hale, and what I read will cloud and make horrible whatever period of life lies ahead of me. The genesis of the world and of previous worlds unfolded itself before my eyes. I learned of the city Shambhala, built by the Lemurians 50 million years ago, yet inviolate still behind its walls of psychic force in the eastern desert. I learned of the Book of Xian, whose first 6 chapters antedate the earth, and which was old when the lords of Venus came through space in their ships to civilize our planet. And I saw recorded in writing for the first time that name which others had spoken to me in whispers, and which I had known in a closer and more horrible way, the shunned and dreaded name of Yan Ho. In several places I was held up by passages requiring a key. Eventually, from various allusions, I gathered that old Klaus had not dared to embody all his knowledge in one book, but had left certain points for another. Neither volume can be wholly intelligible without its fellow, hence I have resolved to find the second one, if it lies anywhere within this accursed house. Though plainly a prisoner, I have not lost my lifelong zeal for the unknown, and am determined to probe the cosmos as deeply as possible before doom comes. April 23rd. Searched all the morning for the second diary, and found it about noon in a desk in the little locked room. Like the first, it is in Klaus van der Hale's barbarous Latin, and it seems to consist of disjointed notes referring to various sections of the other. Glancing through the leaves, I spied at once the abhorred name of Yan Ho, that lost and hidden city, wherein brood eon-old secrets, and of which dim memories older than the body lurk behind the minds of all men. It was repeated many times, and the text around it was strewn with crudely drawn hieroglyphs plainly akin to those on the pedestal in that hellish drawing I had seen. Here, clearly, lay the key to that monstrous tentacled shape and its forbidden message. With this knowledge I ascended the creaking stairs to the attic of cobwebs and horror. When I tried to open the attic door, it stuck as never before. Several times it resisted every effort to open it, and when at last it gave way, I had a distinct feeling that some colossal, unseen shape had suddenly released it, a shape that soared away on non-material but audibly beating wings. When I found the horrible drawing, I felt that it was not precisely where I had left it. Applying the key in the other book, I soon saw that the latter was no instant guide to the secret. It was only a clue to a secret too black to be left lightly guarded. It would take hours, perhaps days, to extract the awful message. Shall I live long enough to learn the secret? The shadowy black arms and paws haunt my vision more and more now, and seem even more titanic than at first. Nor am I ever long free from those vague, unhuman presences whose nebulous bulk seems too vast for the chambers to contain. And now and then, the grotesque, evanescent faces and forms, and the mocking portrait shapes troop before me in bewildering confusion. Truly, there are terrible primal arcana of earth which had better be left unknown and unevoked, dread secrets which have nothing to do with man, and which man may learn only in exchange for peace and sanity, cryptic truths which make the knower ever more an alien among his kind, and cause him to walk alone on earth. Likewise are there dread survivals of things older and more potent than man, things that have blasphemously straggled down through the eons to ages never meant for them, monstrous entities that have lain sleeping endlessly in incredible crypts and remote caverns, outside the laws of reason and causation, and ready to be waked by such blasphemers as shall know their dark forbidden signs and furtive passwords. April 24th. Studied the picture and the key all day in the attic. At sunset I heard strange sounds, of a sort not encountered before, and seeming to come from far away. Listening, I realized that they must flow from that queer abrupt hill with a circle of standing stones which lies behind the village and some distance north of the house. I had heard that there was a path from the house leading up that hill to the primal cromlech, and had suspected that at certain seasons the Vanderhales had much occasion to use it, but the whole matter had hitherto lain latent in my consciousness. The present sounds consisted of a shrill piping, intermingled with a peculiar and hideous sort of hissing or whistling, a bizarre alien kind of music like nothing which the annals of earth describe. It was very faint and soon faded, but the matter has set me thinking. It is toward the hill that the long, northerly ell with the secret chute and the locked brick vault under it extend. Can there be any connection which has so far eluded me? April 25th. I have made a peculiar and disturbing discovery about the nature of my imprisonment. Drawn toward the hill by a sinister fascination, I found the briars giving way before me, but in that direction only. There is a ruined gate, and beneath the bushes the traces of the old path no doubt exist. The briars extend part way up and all around the hill, though the summit with the standing stones bears only a curious growth of moss and stunted grass. I climbed the hill and spent several hours there, noticing a strange wind, which seems always to sweep around the forbidding monoliths, and which sometimes seems to whisper in an oddly articulate though darkly cryptic fashion. These stones, both in colour and in texture, resemble nothing I have seen elsewhere. They are neither brown nor grey, but rather of a dirty yellow, merging into an evil green, and having a suggestion of chameleon-like variability. Their texture is queerly like that of a scaled serpent, and is inexplicably nauseous to the touch, being as cold and clammy as the skin of a toad or other reptile. Near the central menhir is a singular stone-rimmed hollow which I cannot explain, but which may possibly form the entrance to a long-choked well or tunnel. When I sought to descend the hill at points away from the house, I found the briars intercepting me as before, though the path toward the house was easily retraceable. April 26th. Up on the hill again this evening, and found that windy whispering much more distinct. The almost angry humming came close to actual speech, of a vague sibilant sort, and reminded me of the strange piping chant I had heard from afar. After sunset, there came a curious flash of premature summer lightning on the northern horizon, followed almost at once by a queer detonation high in the fading sky. Something about this phenomenon disturbed me greatly, and I could not escape the impression that the noise ended in a kind of unhuman hissing speech which trailed off into guttural cosmic laughter. Is my mind tottering at last? Or has my unwarranted curiosity evoked unheard-of horrors from the twilight spaces? The Sabbath is close at hand now. What will be the end? April 27th. At last my dreams are to be realized. Whether or not my life or spirit or body will be claimed, I shall enter the gateway. Progress in deciphering those crucial hieroglyphs in the picture has been slow, but this afternoon I hit upon the final clue. By evening, I knew their meaning, and that meaning can apply in only one way to the things I have encountered in this house. There is beneath this house, sepulchred I know not where, an ancient forgotten one, who will show me the gateway I would enter, and give me the lost signs and words I shall need. How long it has lain buried here, forgotten save by those who reared the stones on the hill, and by those who later sought out this place and built this house, I cannot conjecture. It was in search of this thing beyond question that Hendrik van der Hale came to New Netherland in 1638. Men of this earth know it not, save in the secret whispers of the fear-shaken few, who have found or inherited the key. No human eye has even yet glimpsed it, unless perhaps the vanished wizards of this house delved farther than has been guessed. With knowledge of the symbols came likewise a mastery of the 7 lost signs of terror, and a tacit recognition of the hideous and unutterable words of fear. All that remains for me to accomplish is the chant which will transfigure that forgotten one, who is guardian of the ancient gateway. I marvel much at the chant. It is composed of strange and repellent gutturals and disturbing sibilants resembling no language I have ever encountered, even in the blackest chapters of the Livre d'Ibon. When I visited the hill at sunset, I tried to read it aloud, but evoked in response only a vague, sinister rumbling on the far horizon, and a thin cloud of elemental dust that writhed and whirled like some evil living thing. Perhaps I do not pronounce the alien syllables correctly, or perhaps it is only on the Sabbath, that hellish Sabbath for which the powers in this house are without question holding me, that the great transfiguration can occur. Had an odd spell of fright this morning. I thought for a moment that I recalled where I had seen that baffling name of Slet before, and the prospect of realization filled me with unutterable horror. April 28th. Today, dark, ominous clouds have hovered intermittently over the circle on the hill. I have noticed such clouds several times before, but their contours and arrangements now hold a fresh significance. They are snake-like and fantastic, and curiously like the evil shadow shapes I have seen in the house. They float in a circle around the primal cromlech, revolving repeatedly as though endowed with a sinister life and purpose. I could swear, too, that they give forth an angry murmuring. After some 15 minutes they sail slowly away, ever to the eastward, like the units of a straggling battalion. Are they indeed those dread ones whom Solomon knew of old, those giant black beings whose number is legion and whose tread doth shake the earth? I have been rehearsing the chant that will transfigure the nameless thing, yet strange fears assail me even when I utter the syllables under my breath. Piecing all evidence together, I have now discovered that the only way to it is through the locked cellar vault. That vault was built with a hellish purpose, and must cover the hidden burrow leading to the immemorial lair. What guardians live endlessly within, flourishing from century to century on an unknown nourishment, only the mad may conjecture. The warlocks of this house, who called them out of inner earth, have known them only too well, as the shocking portraits and memories of the place reveal. What troubles me most is the limited nature of the chant. It evokes the nameless one, yet provides no method for the control of that which is evoked. There are, of course, the general signs and gestures, but whether they will prove effective towards such a one remains to be seen. Still, the rewards are great enough to justify any danger, and I could not retreat if I would, since an unknown force plainly urges me on. I have discovered one more obstacle. Since the locked cellar vault must be traversed, the key to that place must be found. The lock is infinitely too strong for forcing. That the key is somewhere hereabouts cannot be doubted, but the time before the Sabbath is very short. I must search diligently and thoroughly. It will take courage to unlock that iron door, for what prisoned horrors may not lurk within. Later. I have been shunning the cellar for the past day or two, but late this afternoon I again descended to those forbidding precincts. At first all was silent, but within 5 minutes the menacing padding and muttering began once more beyond the iron door. This time it was loud and more terrifying than on any previous occasion, and I likewise recognized the slithering that bespoke some monstrous sea beast now swifter and nervously intensified, as if the thing were striving to force its way through the portal to where I stood. As the pacing grew louder, more restless, and more sinister, there began to pound through it those hellish and unidentifiable reverberations which I had heard on my second visit to the cellar, those muffled reverberations which seemed to echo from far horizons like distant thunder. Now, however, their volume was magnified 100-fold, and their timbre freighted with new and terrifying implications. I can compare the sound to nothing more aptly than to the roar of some dread monster of the vanished Saurian age, when primal horrors roamed the earth and Volusius serpent men laid the foundation stones of evil magic. To such a roar, but swelled to deafening heights reached by no known organic throat, was this shocking sound akin. Dare I unlock the door and face the onslaught of what lies beyond? April 29th. The key to the vault is found. I came upon it this noon in the little locked room, buried beneath rubbish in a drawer of the ancient desk, as if some belated effort to conceal it had been made. It was wrapped in a crumbling newspaper dated October 31st, 1872, but there was an inner wrapping of dried skin, evidently the hide of some unknown reptile, which bore a low Latin message in the same crabbed writing as that of the notebooks I found. As I had thought, the lock and key were vastly older than the vault. Old Klaus van der Hale had them ready for something he or his descendants meant to do, and how much older than he they were I could not estimate. Deciphering the Latin message, I trembled in a fresh access of clutching terror and nameless awe. "The secrets of the monstrous primal ones," ran the crabbed text, "whose cryptic words relate the hidden things that were before man, the things no one of earth should learn, lest peace be forever forfeited, shall by me never suffer revelation. To Yan-ho, that lost and forbidden city of countless eons whose place may not be told, I have been in the veritable flesh of this body, as none other among the living has been. Therein have I found, and thence have I borne away, that knowledge which I would gladly lose, though I may not. I have learnt to bridge a gap that should not be bridged, and must call out of the earth that which should not be waked or called. And what is sent to follow me will not sleep till I or those after me have found and done what is to be found and done. That which I have awaked and borne away with me, I may not part with again. So is it written in the book of hidden things. That which I have willed to be has twined its dreadful shape around me, and, if I live not to do the bidding, around those children born and unborn who shall come after me, until the bidding be done. Strange may be their joinings, and awful the aid they may summon till the end be reached. Into lands unknown and dim must the seeking go, and a house must be built for the outer guardians. This is the key to that lock, which was given me in the dreadful, eon-old and forbidden city of Yan-ho, the lock which I or mine must place upon the vestibule of that which is to be found. And may the lords of Yedith succor me, or him, who must set that lock in place or turn the key thereof. Such was the message, a message which, once I had read it, I seemed to have known before. Now, as I write these words, the key is before me. I gaze on it with mixed dread and longing, and cannot find words to describe its aspect. It is of the same unknown, subtly greenish frosted metal as the lock, a metal best compared to brass tarnished with verdigris. Its design is alien and fantastic, and the coffin-shaped end of the ponderous bulk leaves no doubt of the lock it was meant to fit. The handle roughly forms a strange, non-human image, whose exact outlines and identity cannot now be traced. Upon holding it for any length of time, I seem to feel an alien, anomalous life in the cold metal, a quickening or pulsing too feeble for ordinary recognition. Below the eidolon is graven a faint, eon-worn legend in those blasphemous Chinese-like hieroglyphs I have come to know so well. I can make out only the beginning, the words, "My vengeance lurks," before the text fades to indistinctness. There is some fatality in this timely finding of the key, for tomorrow night comes the hellish Sabbath. But strangely enough, amidst all this hideous expectancy, that question of the Slet name bothers me more and more. Why should I dread to find it linked with the Vanderhales? Walpurgis Eve, April 30th. The time has come. I waked last night to see the sky glowing with a lurid, greenish radiance, that same morbid green which I have seen in the eyes and skin of certain portraits here, on the shocking lock and key, on the monstrous menhirs of the hill, and in 1,000 other recesses of my consciousness. There were strident whispers in the air, sibilant whistlings like those of the wind around that dreadful cromlech. Something spoke to me out of the frore ether of space, and it said, "The hour falls." It is an omen, and I laugh at my own fears. Have I not the dread words and the 7 lost signs of terror, the power coercive of any dweller in the cosmos or in the unknown darkened spaces? I will no longer hesitate. The heavens are very dark, as if a terrific storm were coming on, a storm even greater than that of the night when I reached here, nearly a fortnight ago. From the village, less than a mile away, I hear a queer and unwanted babbling. It is as I thought. These poor degraded idiots are within the secret, and keep the awful Sabbath on the hill. Here in the house the shadows gather densely. In the darkness the key before me almost glows with a greenish light of its own. I have not yet been to the cellar. It is better that I wait, lest the sound of that muttering and padding, those slitherings and muffled reverberations, unnerve me before I can unlock the fateful door. Of what I shall encounter, and what I must do, I have only the most general idea. Shall I find my task in the vault itself, or must I burrow deeper into the nighted heart of our planet? There are things I do not yet understand, or at least prefer not to understand, despite a dreadful, increasing, and inexplicable sense of bygone familiarity with this fearsome house. That chute, for instance, leading down from the little locked room. But I think I know why the wing with the vault extends toward the hill. 6 p.m. Looking out the north windows, I can see a group of villagers on the hill. They seem unaware of the lowering sky, and are digging near the great central menhir. It occurs to me that they are working on that stone-rimmed hollow place which looks like a long-choked tunnel entrance. What is to come? How much of the olden Sabbath rites have these people retained? That key glows horribly. It is not imagination. Dare I use it, as it must be used? Another matter has greatly disturbed me. Glancing nervously through a book in the library, I came upon an ampler form of the name that has teased my memory so sorely. Trinci, wife of Adrian Slet. The Adrian leads me to the very brink of recollection. Midnight. Horror is unleashed, but I must not weaken. The storm has broken with pandemoniac fury, and lightning has struck the hill 3 times, yet the hybrid malformed villagers are gathering within the cromlech. I can see them in the almost constant flashes. The great standing stones loom up shockingly, and have a dull green luminosity that reveals them even when the lightning is not there. The peals of thunder are deafening, and every one seems to be horribly answered from some indeterminate direction. As I write, the creatures on the hill have begun to chant and howl and scream in a degraded half-simian version of the ancient ritual. Rain pours down like a flood, yet they leap and emit sounds in a kind of diabolic ecstasy. Yah, Shabna Gurath, the goat with 1,000 young. But the worst thing is within the house. Even at this height I have begun to hear sounds from the cellar. It is the padding and muttering and slithering and muffled reverberations within the vault. Memories come and go. That name of Adrian Slett pounds oddly at my consciousness. Dirk van der Hale's son-in-law, his child, old Dirk's granddaughter, and Abaddon Corey's great-granddaughter. Later. Merciful God! At last I know where I saw that name. I know and am transfixed with horror. All is lost. The key has begun to feel warm as my left hand nervously clutches it. At times that vague quickening or pulsing is so distinct that I can almost feel the living metal move. It came from Yan Ho for a terrible purpose, and to me, who all too late know the thin stream of Van der Hale blood that trickles down through the Sletts into my own lineage, has descended the hideous task of fulfilling that purpose. My courage and curiosity wane. I know the horror that lies beyond that iron door. What if Klaus Van der Hale was my ancestor? Need I expiate his nameless sin? I will not, I swear I will not. Too late, cannot help self. Black paws materialize. Am dragged away toward the cellar. The Horror in the Lighthouse by Edgar Allan Poe and Robert Bloch. January 1st, 1796. This day, my first on the lighthouse, I make this entry in my diary, as agreed on with Degrat. As regularly as I can keep the journal, I will, but there is no telling what may happen to a man all alone as I am. I may get sick or worse. So far, well. The cutter had a narrow escape, but why dwell on that, since I am here, all safe? My spirits are beginning to revive already, at the mere thought of being, for once in my life at least, thoroughly alone. For of course, Neptune, large as he is not to be taken into consideration as society. Would to heaven I had ever found in society one half as much faith as in this poor dog. In such case I and society might never have parted, even for a year. What most surprises me is the difficulty Degrat had in getting me the appointment, and I a noble of the realm. It could not be that the consistory had any doubt of my ability to manage the light. One man has attended it before now, and got on quite as well as the 3 that are usually put in. The duty is a mere nothing, and the printed instructions are as plain as possible. It would never have done to let Orndorff accompany me. I should never have made any way with my book as long as he was within reach of me, with his intolerable gossip, not to mention that everlasting meerschaum. Besides, I wish to be alone. It is strange that I never observed, until this moment, how dreary a sound that word has, alone. I could half fancy there was some peculiarity in the echo of these cylindrical walls, but, oh no, that is all nonsense. I do believe I am going to get nervous about my insulation. That will never do. I have not forgotten Degrat's prophecy. Now for a scramble to the lantern and a good look around to see what I can see. To see what I can see, indeed. Not very much. The swell is subsiding a little, I think, but the cutter will have a rough passage home, nevertheless. She will hardly get within sight of the Norlon before noon tomorrow, and yet it can hardly be more than 190 or 200 miles. January 2nd. I have passed this day in a species of ecstasy that I find it impossible to describe. My passion for solitude could scarcely have been more thoroughly gratified. I do not say satisfied, for I believe I should never be satiated with such delight as I have experienced today. The wind lulled after daybreak, and by the afternoon the sea had gone down materially. Nothing to be seen with the telescope even but ocean and sky, with an occasional gull. January 3rd. A dead calm all day. Towards evening the sea looked very much like glass. A few seaweeds came in sight, but besides them absolutely nothing all day, not even the slightest speck of cloud. Occupied myself in exploring the lighthouse. It is a very lofty one, as I find to my cost when I have to ascend its interminable stairs, not quite 160 feet, I should say, from the low water mark to the top of the lantern. From the bottom inside the shaft, however, the distance to the summit is 180 feet at least. Thus the floor is 20 feet below the surface of the sea, even at low tide. It seems to me that the hollow interior at the bottom should have been filled in with solid masonry. Undoubtedly the hole would have been thus rendered more safe, but what am I thinking about? A structure such as this is safe enough under any circumstances. I should feel myself secure in it during the fiercest hurricane that ever raged. And yet I have heard seamen say that, occasionally, with a wind at southwest, the sea has been known to run higher here than anywhere, with the single exception of the western opening of the Straits of Magellan. No mere sea, though, could accomplish anything with this solid iron-riveted wall, which, at 50 feet from high water mark, is 4 feet thick, if 1 inch. The basis on which the structure rests seems to me to be chalk. January 4th. I am now prepared to resume work on my book, having spent this day in familiarizing myself with a regular routine. My actual duties will be, I perceive, absurdly simple. The light requires little tending beyond a periodic replenishment of the oil for the 6-wick burner. As to my own needs, they are easily satisfied, and the exertion of an occasional trip down the stairs is all I must anticipate. At the base of the stairs is the entrance room. Beneath that is 20 feet of empty shaft. Above the entrance room, at the next turn of the circular iron staircase, is my storeroom, which contains the casks of fresh water and the food supplies, plus linens and other daily needs. Above that, again, another spiral of those interminable stairs, is the oil room, completely filled with the tanks from which I must feed the wicks. Fortunately, I perceive that I can limit my descent to the storeroom to once a week if I choose, for it is possible for me to carry sufficient provisions in one load to supply both myself and Neptune for such a period. As to the oil supply, I need only to bring up 2 drums every 3 days, and thus ensure a constant illumination. If I choose, I can place a dozen or more spare drums on the platform near the light, and thus provide for several weeks to come. So it is that in my daily existence I can limit my movements to the upper half of the lighthouse, that is to say, the 3 spirals opening on the topmost 3 levels. The lowest is my living room, and it is here, of course, that Neptune is confined the greater part of the day. Here, too, that I plan to write at a desk near the wall slit that affords a view of the sea without. The second highest level is my bedroom and kitchen combined. Here the weekly rations of food and water are contained in cupboards for that purpose. Here, too, is the ingenious stove fed by the self-same oil that lights the beacon above. The topmost level is the service room, giving access to the light itself and to the platform surrounding it. Since the light is fixed and its reflectors set, there is no need for me ever to ascend to the platform, save when replenishing the oil supply, or making a repair or adjustment as per the written instructions, a circumstance which may well never arise during my stay here. Already I have carried enough oil, water, and provender to the upper levels to last me for an entire month. I need stir from my 2 rooms only to replenish the wicks. For the rest, I am free, utterly free. My time is my own, and in this lofty realm I rule as king. Although Neptune is my only living subject, I can well imagine that I am sovereign over all I see, ocean below and stars above. I am master of the sun that rises in rubicund radiance from the sea at dawn, emperor of wind and monarch of the gale, sultan of the waves that sport or roar in roiling torrents about the base of my palace pinnacle. I command the moon in the heavens, and the very ebb and flow of the tide does homage to my reign. But enough of fancies. De Grat warned me to refrain from morbid or from grandiose speculation. Now I shall take up in all earnestness the task that lies before me. Yet this night, as I sit before the window in the starlight, the tide sweeping against these lofty walls can only echo my exultation. I am free, and at last alone. January 11th. A week has passed since my last entry in this diary, and as I read it over, I can scarce comprehend that it was I who penned those words. Something has happened, the nature of which lies unfathomed. I have worked, eaten, slept, replenished the wicks twice. My outward existence has been placid. I can ascribe the alteration in my feelings to naught but some inner alchemy, enough to say that a disturbing change has taken place. Alone, I, who breathe the word as if it were some mystic incantation bestowing peace, have come, I realize it now, to loathe the very sound of the syllables, and the ghastliness of meaning I know full well. It is a dismaying, it is a dreadful thing to be alone. Truly alone, as I am, with only Neptune to exist beside me, and by his breathing presence remind me that I am not the sole inhabitant of a blind and senseless universe. The sun and stars that wheel overhead in their endless cycle seem to rush across the horizon unheeding, and of late unheeded, for I cannot fix my mind upon them with normal constancy. The sea that swirls or ripples below me is naught but a purposeless chaos of utter emptiness. I thought myself to be a man of singular self-sufficiency, beyond the petty needs of a boring and banal society. How wrong I was, for I find myself longing for the sight of another face, the sound of another voice, the touch of other hands, whether they offer caresses or blows. Anything for reassurement that my dreams are indeed false, and that I am not actually alone. And yet I am, and I will be. The world is 200 miles away. I will not know it again for an entire year, and it in turn, but no more. I cannot put down my thoughts while in the grip of this morbid mood. January 13th. 2 more days, 2 more centuries have passed. Can it be less than 2 weeks since I was immured in this prison tower? I mount the turret of my dungeon and gaze at the horizon. I am not hemmed in by bars of steel, but by columns and pillars and webs of wild and raging water. The sea has changed. Grey skies have wrought a wizardry, so that I stand surrounded by a tumult that threatens to become a tempest. I turn away, for I can bear no more, and descend to my room. I seek to write. The book is bravely begun, but of late I can bring myself to do nothing constructive or creative, and in a moment I fling aside my pen and rise to pace, to endlessly pace the narrow, circular confines of my tower of torment. Wild words, these, and yet I am not alone in my affliction. Neptune the loyal, the calm, the placid, feels it too. Perhaps it is but the approach of the storm that agitates him so, for nature bears closer kinship with the beast. He stays constantly at my side, whining now, and the muffled roaring of the waves without our prison causes him to tremble. There is a chill in the air that our stove cannot dissipate, but it is not cold that oppresses him. I have just mounted to the platform and gazed out at the spectacle of gathering storm. The waves are fantastically high. They sweep against the lighthouse in titanic tumult. These solid walls of stone shudder rhythmically with each onslaught. The churning sea is grey no longer. The water is black as basalt and as heavy. The sky's hue has deepened, so that at the moment no horizon is visible. I am surrounded by a billowing blackness thundering against me. Back below now, as lightning flickers. The storm will break soon, and Neptune howls piteously. I stroke his quivering flanks, but the poor animal shrinks away. It seems that he fears even my presence. Can it be that my own features betray an equal agitation? I do not know. I only feel that I am helpless, trapped here and awaiting the mercy of the storm. I cannot write much longer. And yet I will set down a further statement. I must, if only to prove to myself that reason again prevails. In writing of my venture up to the platform, my viewing of the sea and sky, I omitted to mention the meaning of a single moment. There came upon me, as I gazed down at the black and boiling madness of the waters below, a wild and wilful craving to become one with it. But why should I disguise the naked truth? I felt an insane impulse to hurl myself into the sea. It has passed now. Passed, I pray, forever. I did not yield to this perverse prompting, and I am back here in my quarters, writing calmly once again. Yet the fact remains. The hideous urge to destroy myself came suddenly, and with the force of one of those monstrous waves. And what, I forced myself to realize, was the meaning of my demented desire. It was that I sought escape from loneliness. It was as if by mingling with the sea and the storm, I would no longer be alone. But I defy the elements. I defy the powers of the earth and of the heavens. Alone I am, alone I must be. And, come what may, I shall survive. My laughter rises above all your thunder. So, ye spirits of the storm, blow, howl, rage, hurl your watery weight against my fortress. I am greater than you in all your powers. But wait! Neptune! Something has happened to the creature. I must attend him. January 16th. The storm is abated. I am back at my desk now, alone, truly alone. I have locked poor Neptune in the storeroom below. The unfortunate beast seems driven out of his wits by the forces of the storm. When last I wrote, he was worked into a frenzy, whining and pawing and wheeling in circles. He was incapable of responding to my commands, and I had no choice but to literally drag him down the stairs by the scruff of his neck and incarcerate him in the storeroom, where he could not come to harm. I own that concern for my safety was involved. The possibility of being imprisoned in this lighthouse with a mad dog must be avoided. His howls throughout the storm were pitiable indeed, but now he is silent. When last I ventured to gaze into the room, I perceived him sleeping, and I trust that rest and calm will restore him to my full companionship, as before. Companionship. How shall I describe the horrors of the storm I faced alone? In this diary entry I have prefaced a date, January 16th, but that is merely a guess. The storm has swept away all track of time. Did it last a day, 2 days, 3, as I now surmise, a week, or a century? I do not know. I know only an endless raging of waters that threatened, time and again, to engulf the very pinnacle of the lighthouse. I know only an eternity of ebony, an eon of billowing black composed of sea and sky commingled. I only know that there were times when my own voice outroared the storm, but how can I convey the cause of that? There was a time, perhaps a full day, perhaps much longer, when I could not bear to rise from my couch, but lay with my face buried in the pillows, weeping like a child. But mine were not the pure tears of childhood innocence. Call them, rather, the tears of Lucifer upon the realization of his eternal fall from grace. It seemed to me that I was truly the victim of an endless damnation, condemned forever to remain a prisoner in a world of thunderous chaos. There is no need to write of the fancies and fantasies which assailed me through those unhallowed hours. At times I felt that the lighthouse was giving way, and that I would be swept into the sea. At times I knew myself to be a victim of a colossal plot. I cursed de Grat for sending me, knowingly, to my doom. At times, and these were the worst moments of all, I felt the full force of loneliness crashing down upon me in waves higher than those wrought by water. But all is past, and the sea and myself are calm again. A peculiar calmness, this. As I gaze out upon the water, there are certain phenomena I was not aware of until this very moment. Before setting down my observations, let me reassure myself that I am indeed quite calm. No trace of my former tremors or agitation yet remains. The transient madness induced by the storm has departed, and my brain is free of phantasms. Indeed, my perceptive faculties seem to be sharpened to an unusual acuity. It is almost as though I find myself in possession of an additional sense, an ability to analyze and penetrate beyond former limitations superimposed by nature. The water on which I gaze is placid once more. The sky is only lightly leaden in hue. But wait, lo, on the horizon creeps a sudden flame. It is the sun, the Arctic sun in sullen splendor, emerging momentarily from the pole to incarnadine the ocean. Sun and sky, sea and air about me, turn to blood. Can it be I, who but a moment ago wrote of regained sanity? I, who have just shrieked aloud, alone, and half rising from my chair, heard the muffled booming echo reverberate through the lonely lighthouse, its sepulchral accent intoning alone in answer? It may be that I am, despite all resolution, going mad. If so, I pray the end comes soon. January 18th. There will be no end. I have conceived a notion, a theory which my heightened faculties soon will test. I shall embark upon an experiment. January 26th. A week has passed here in my solitary prison. Solitary? Perhaps, but not for long. The experiment is proceeding. I must set down what has occurred. The sound of the echo set me to thinking. One sends out one's voice, and it comes back. One sends out one's thoughts, and can it be that there is a response? Sound, as we know, travels in waves and patterns. The emanations of the brain, perhaps, travel similarly, and they are not confined by physical laws of time, space, or duration. Can one's thoughts produce a reply that materializes, just as one's voice produces an echo? An echo is a product of a certain vacuum, a thought. Concentration is the key. I have been concentrating. My supplies are replenished. A Neptune, visited during my venture below, seems rational enough, although he shrinks away when I approach him. I have left him below and spent the past week here. Concentration, I repeat, is the key to my experiment. Concentration, by its very nature, is a difficult task. I addressed myself to it with no little trepidation. Strive but to remain seated quietly with a mind empty of all thought, and one finds in the space of a very few minutes that the errant body is engaged in all manner of distracting movement, foot-tapping, finger-twisting, facial grimacing. This I managed to overcome after a matter of many hours. My first 3 days were virtually exhausted in an effort to rid myself of nervous agitation and assume the inner and outer tranquillity of the Indian fakir. Then came the task of filling the empty consciousness, filling it completely with one intense and concentrated effort of will. What echo would I bring forth from nothingness? What companionship would I seek here in my loneliness? What was the sign or symbol I desired? What symbolized to me the whole absent world of life and light? Dick Rat would laugh me to scorn if he but knew the concept that I chose. Yet I, the cynical, the jaded, the decadent, searched my soul, plumbed my longing, and found that which I most desired. A simple sign, a token of all the earth removed, a fresh and growing flower, a rose. Yes, a simple rose is what I have sought, a rose torn from its living stem, perfumed with the sweet incarnation of life itself. Seated here before the window, I have dreamed, I have mused, I have then concentrated with every fibre of my being upon a rose. My mind was filled with redness, not the redness of the sun upon the sea, or the redness of blood, but the rich and radiant redness of the rose. My soul was suffused with the scent of a rose. As I brought my faculties to bear exclusively upon the image, these walls fell away. The walls of my very flesh fell away, and I seemed to merge in the texture, the odor, the color, the actual essence of a rose. Shall I write of this, the seventh day, when, seated at the window as the sun emerged from the sea, I felt the commanding of my consciousness? Shall I write of rising, descending the stairs, opening the iron door at the base of the lighthouse, and peering out at the billows that swirled at my very feet? Shall I write of stooping, of grasping, of holding? Shall I write that I have indeed descended those iron stairs and returned here with my wave-borne trophy, that this very day, from waters 200 miles distant from any shore, I have reached down and plucked a fresh rose? January 28th. It has not withered. I keep it before me constantly in a vase on this table, and it is a priceless ruby plucked from dreams. It is real as the howls of poor Neptune, who senses that something odd is afoot. His frantic barking does not disturb me. Nothing disturbs me, for I am master of a power greater than earth or space or time, and I shall use this power now to bring me the final boon. Here in my tower I have become quite the philosopher. I have learned my lesson well, and realize that I do not desire wealth or fame or the trinkets of society. My need is simply this: companionship. And now, with the power that is mine to control, I shall have it. Soon, quite soon, I shall no longer be alone. January 30th. The storm has returned, but I pay it no heed, nor do I mark the howlings of Neptune, although the beast is now literally dashing himself against the door of the storeroom. One might fancy that his efforts are responsible for the shuddering of the very lighthouse itself, but no, it is the fury of the northern gale. I pay it no heed, as I say, but I fully realize that this storm surpasses in extent and intensity anything I could imagine as witness to its predecessor. Yet it is unimportant. Even though the light above me flickers and threatens to be extinguished by the sheer velocity of wind that seeps through these stout walls, even though the ocean sweeps against the foundations with a force that makes solid stone seem flimsy as straw, even though the sky is a single black, roaring mouth that yawns low upon the horizon to engulf me. These things I sense but dimly as I address myself to the appointed task. I pause now only for food and a brief respite, and scribble down these words to mark the progress of resolution towards an inevitable goal. For the past several days I have bent my faculties to my will, concentrating utterly and to the uttermost upon the summoning of a companion. This companion will be, I confess it, a woman far surpassing the limitations of common mortality, for she is and must be fashioned of dreams and longing, of desire and delight beyond the bounds of flesh. She is the woman of whom I have always dreamed, the one I have sought in vain through what I once presumed in my ignorance was the world of reality. It seems to me now that I have always known her, that my soul has contained her presence forever. I can visualize her perfectly. I know her hair, each strand more precious than a miser's gold, the riches of her ivory and alabaster brow, the perfection of her face and form are etched forever in my consciousness. Degrat would scoff that she is but the figment of a dream, but Degrat did not see the rose. The rose, I hesitate to speak of it, has gone. It was the rose which I set before me when first I composed myself to this new effort of will. I gazed at it intently until vision faded, senses stilled, and I lost myself in the attempt of conjuring up my vision of a companion. Hours later, the sound of rising waters from without aroused me. I gazed about, my eyes sought the reassurance of the rose, and rested only upon a foulness. Where the rose had risen proudly in its vase, red crest rampant upon a living stem, I now perceived only a noxious, utterly detestable strand of ichorous decay. No rose this, but only seaweed, rotted, noisome, and putrescent. I flung it away, but for long moments I could not banish a wild presentiment. Was it true that I had deceived myself? Was it a weed, and only a weed I plucked from the ocean's breast? Did the force of my thought momentarily invest it with the attributes of a rose? Would anything I called up from the depths of sea or the depths of consciousness, be truly real? The blessed image of the companion came to soothe these fevered speculations, and I knew myself saved. There was a rose. Perhaps my thought had created it and nourished it. Only when my entire concentration turned to other things did it depart, or resume another shape. And with my companion there will be no need for focusing my faculties elsewhere. She, and she alone, will be the recipient of everything my mind, my heart, my soul possesses. If will, if sentiment, if love are needed to preserve her, these things she shall have in entirety. So there is nothing to fear, nothing to fear. Once again now I shall lay my pen aside, and return to the great task, the task of creation, if you will, and I shall not fail. The fear, I admit it, of loneliness is enough to drive me forward to unimaginable brinks. She, and she alone, can save me, shall save me, must save me. I can see her now, the golden glitter of her, and my consciousness calls to her to rise, to appear before me in radiant reality. Somewhere upon these storm-tossed seas, she exists, I know it, and wherever she may be, my call will come to her, and she will respond. January 31st. The command came at midnight, roused from the depths of the most profound, innermost communion by a thunderclap. I rose as though in the grip of somnambulistic compulsion, and moved down the spiral stairs. The lantern I bore trembled in my hand. Its light wavered in the wind, and the very iron treads beneath my feet shook with the furious force of the storm. The booming of the waves as they struck the lighthouse wall seemed to place me within the center of a maelstrom of ear-shattering sound. Yet over the demoniacal din I could detect the frenzied howls of poor Neptune as I passed the door behind which he was confined. The door shook with the combined force of the wind and of his still desperate efforts to free himself, but I hastened on my way, descending to the iron door at the base of the lighthouse. To open it required the use of both hands, and I set the lantern down at one side. To open it, moreover, required the summoning of a resolution I scarcely possessed, for beyond that door was the force and fury of the wildest storm that ever shrieked across these seething seas. A sudden wave might dash me from the doorway, or, conversely, enter and inundate the lighthouse itself. But consciousness prevailed. Consciousness drove me forward. I knew. I thrilled to the certainty that she was without the iron portal. I unbolted the door with the urgency of one who rushes into the arms of his beloved. The door swung open, blew open, roared open, and the storm burst upon me, a ravening monster of black-mouthed waves capped with white fangs. The sea and sky surged forward as if to attack, and I stood enveloped in chaos. A flash of lightning revealed the immensity of utter nightmare. I saw it not, for the same flash illumined the form, the lineaments of she whom I sought. Lightning and lantern were unneeded. Her golden glory outshone all as she stood there, pale and trembling, a goddess arisen from the depths of the sea. Hallucination? Vision? Apparition? My trembling fingers sought and found their answer. Her flesh was real, cold as the icy waters from whence she came, but palpable and permanent. I thought of the storm, of doomed ships and drowning men, of a girl cast upon the waters and struggling towards the succor of the lighthouse beacon. I thought of 1,000 explanations, 1,000 miracles, 1,000 riddles, or reasons beyond rationality. Yet only one thing mattered. My companion was here. I had but to step forward and take her in my arms. No word was spoken, nor could one be heard in all that inferno. No word was needed, for she smiled. Pale lips parted as I held out my arms, and she moved closer. Pale lips parted, and I saw the pointed teeth set in rows like those of a shark. Her eyes, fish-like and staring, swam closer. As I recoiled, her arms came up to cling, and they were cold as the waters beneath, cold as the storm, cold as death. In one monstrous moment I knew with uttermost certainty, that the power of my will had indeed summoned, the call of my consciousness had been answered, but the answer came not from the living, for nothing lived in this storm. I had sent my will out over the waters, but the will penetrates all dimensions, and my answer had come from below the waters. She was from below, where the drowned dead lie dreaming, and I had awakened her and clothed her with a horrid life, a life that thirsted and must drink. I think I shrieked then, but I heard no sound. Certainly, I did not hear the howls from Neptune as the beast burst from his prison, bounded down the stairs, and flung himself upon the creature. His furry form bore her back and obscured my vision. In an instant she was falling backwards away into the sea that spawned her. Then, and only then, did I catch a glimpse of the final moment of animation in that which my consciousness had summoned. Lightning seared the sight inexorably upon my soul, the sight of the ultimate blasphemy I had created in my pride. The rose had wilted. The rose had wilted and become seaweed, and now the golden one was gone, and in its place was the bloated, swollen obscenity of a thing long drowned and dead, risen from the slime, and to that slime returning. Only a moment, and then the waves overwhelmed it, bore it back into the blackness. Only a moment, and the door was slammed shut. Only a moment, and I raced up the iron stairs, Neptune yammering at my heels. Only a moment, and I reached the safety of this sanctuary. Safety? There is no safety in the universe for me. No safety in a consciousness that could create such horror. And there is no safety here. The wrath of the waves increases with every moment. The anger of the sea and its creatures rises to an inevitable crescendo. Mad or sane, it does not matter, for the end is the same in either case. I know now that the lighthouse will shatter and fall. I am already shattered and must fall with it. There is time only to gather these notes, strap them securely in a cylinder, and attach it to Neptune's collar. It may be that he can swim or cling to a fragment of debris. It may be that a ship passing by this toppling beacon may stay and search the waters for a sign, and thus find and rescue the gallant beast. That ship shall not find me. I go with the lighthouse, and go willingly down to the dark depths. Perhaps, is it but perverted poetry? I shall join my companion there forever. Perhaps. The lighthouse is trembling. The beacon flickers above my head, and I hear the rush of waters in their final onslaught. There is, yes, a wave bearing down upon me. It is higher than the tower. It blots out the sky itself. everything. The Diary of Philip Westerly by Paul Compton. It has been 10 years since my uncle, Philip Westerly, disappeared. Many theories have been advanced as to why and how he vanished so strangely and so completely. Many have wondered why a man should vanish and leave nothing behind him but a smashed mirror. But none of these theories or wild imaginings are half so fantastic as the story I gathered from the diary, which some whim prompted him to keep. But first a word about Philip Westerly. He was a wealthy man and also a cruel, selfish man. His wealth was attributed to this same cruelty and selfishness. He also had many whims. One of them was keeping a diary. Another was his love for mirrors. He was handsome in a cruel sort of way, and almost effeminate in his liking to stand before them and admire himself. This eccentricity was borne out by the fact that covering one whole side of his room was a mirror of gigantic size, the same mirror that is linked with his disappearance. But read the excerpts from the diary of Philip Westerly. August 3rd, afternoon. Billings asked for an extension on that note today, but I saw no reason why I should grant him any such thing. When I told him this, he began cursing me in a frightful manner. He said I was cruel and that some day I would be called to account for the way I treated people. I laughed outright at this, but at the same time I felt a vague sense of uneasiness which even yet I have not dispelled. Night. A remarkable thing has happened. I had gone to my room to dress for dinner, and I was standing before the mirror tying my tie. I had begun the usual procedure that one follows when I noticed that no such action was recorded in the mirror. True, there was my reflection in the glass, but it followed none of the movements that I made. It was immobile. I extended my hand to touch the reflection, and encountered nothing but the polished surface of the mirror. Then I noticed a truly remarkable thing. The reflection in the mirror wore no tie. I stepped back aghast. Was this an illusion? Had my mind and vision been affected by some malady that I was not aware of? Impossible! Then I regarded the reflection with a more careful scrutiny. There were a number of differences between it and myself. For one thing, it wore a stubbly growth of beard on its face. I was positive that I had visited the barber that very day, and passed my hand across my chin to verify this. It encountered nothing but smooth skin. The lips of the man in the mirror drooped in a display of gnarled yellow fangs, while my own bared nothing but 2 rows of gleaming, well-cared-for teeth. I was filled simultaneously with a feeling of disgust and fear, and looked for further discrepancies. I found them. The feet and hands were abnormally large, and the clothing of the thing was old, baggy, and covered with filth. I dared not stay longer. I tied the tie as best I could, and descended hurriedly to dinner. August 4th, morning. I awoke feeling jaded and tired. My friend in the mirror is still with me. Ordinarily, the reflection of myself in bed is caught in the mirror, but not so this morning. Instead, I saw that the dweller within had, like myself, been having a night's rest. I hope he slept better than I did, for my own night was a series of fitful, restless tossings. "Good morning," I said, rising. When I moved, he moved. As I advanced toward the mirror, he drew closer to me. I stopped and surveyed him. He resembled me only remotely, I hope. I smiled, and he responded with a wolfish twist of his mouth. I extended my hand as if I wanted to shake hands with him, but he drew back as if from fire. I can't understand the terror which he holds for me. I try not to show my fear in front of him, but I feel that, animal-like, he senses it. I refer to the reflection as he, him, or it, for I cannot bring myself to admit that the thing in the mirror is my reflection, but I scarcely dare write what I do believe it to be. I have always been skeptical about such things as soul, but when I look into the mirror, God help me. Night. I am spending much time in my room now. I've spent most of the day here. This thing is beginning to hold a morbid fascination for me. I can't stay away for any length of time. I wish I could. My wife is beginning to worry about me. She says I look pale. She tells me I need a rest, a long rest. If I could only confide in her, in anyone. But I can't. I must fight and wait this out alone. August 5th. There has been little or no change in our relationship. He still remains aloof. Today, my wife came to my room to see how I was feeling. She stood in such a position that looking into the mirror was unavoidable. She stood before the mirror, arranging her hair. She noticed nothing out of the ordinary, but he was still there, damn him! He was still there, and this time he snarled in triumph at me. One other remarkable thing. My wife hadn't seen the thing there in the mirror, but neither had I seen her reflection. It was the same with Peter, my valet, and Anna, the maid. Anna would have dusted the mirror had I not stopped her. I must take no chances. A close scrutiny might reveal him to them, and they must not know. They must not know. August 6th. 3 days. 3 days of hell. That's what it has been since I discovered that damned thing. How he tortures me. He has begun to mock me. When he thinks he has given an extraordinarily clever impersonation, he shakes with laughter. I can't hear him laugh, but I see him, and that's worse. I can't stand it much longer. August 7th. We never know how much we can stand until we go through some ordeal such as I am now undergoing. But I feel that my nerve is near the breaking point. I have locked the door of my room. Anna leaves a tray outside my door. Sometimes I eat the food she brings, but more often I don't. My wife begs me to let her in, but I tell her to go away. I'm afraid to tell her. I'm afraid to tell anyone. I know what they do with people who have hallucinations. No, I can't tell. Neither can I leave. God knows why, but I can't. August 8th. It was day before yesterday that I mentioned his mocking me. Today I tremble at the thought he is beginning to resemble me. This morning I looked in the mirror and discovered that he had discarded his rags and was now dressed in one of my suits. I ran to the wardrobe and discovered his clothes hanging where mine had been. I turned and faced him. He laughed and pointed toward my hands and feet. They were bloated beyond recognition. I dare not guess how far this change has gone. I can write no more today. August 9th. The change is complete. He looks more like me than I do myself. He has grown more cruel with the change. He taunts me with my ugliness. Finally, I could stand it no longer. I fled from the room. At last I found the thing I was looking for, a mirror. When I came face to face with what I now am, I nearly collapsed. Yes, he has taken my form. God pity me. I've taken his. I slunk back to the room in horror, back to his laughter and the hell that is now my existence. God knows what tomorrow will bring. August 10th. 7 days since that devil has been in the mirror. I have prayed to God that it may be the last. It will. I know it will. He, in the mirror, senses it too. I see the look of apprehension in his eyes. Damn him! It's my turn to snarl in triumph now, for when I lay down this pen, for the last time perhaps, I shall leap through the mirror, and he exists only in the mirror. God help me! I am laying down my pen. Notebook found in a deserted house by Robert Bloch. First off, I want to write that I never did anything wrong. Not to nobody. They got no call to shut me up here, whoever they are. They got no reason to do what I'm afraid they're going to do either. I think they're coming pretty soon, because they've been gone outside a long time. Digging, I guess, in that old well. Looking for a gate, I heard. Not a regular gate, of course, but something else. Got a notion what they mean, and I'm scared. I'd look out the windows, but of course they're boarded up, so I can't see. But I turned on the lamp, and I found this here notebook, so I want to put it all down. Then if I get a chance, maybe I can send it to somebody who can help me. Or maybe somebody will find it. Anyway, it's better to write it out as best I can instead of just sitting here and waiting for them to come and get me. I better start by telling my name, which is Willie Osborne, and that I am 12 years old last July. I don't know where I was born. First thing I can remember is living out Rudsford way, out in what folks call the back Lil country. It's real lonesome out there, with deep woods all around and lots of mountains and hills that nobody ever climbs. Grandma used to tell me about it when I was just a little shaver. That's who I lived with, just Grandma on account of my real folks being dead. Grandma was the one who taught me how to read and write. I never been to a regular school. Grandma knew all kinds of things about the hills and the woods, and she told me some mighty queer stories. That's what I thought they was anyway, when I was little and living all alone with her. Just stories, like the ones in books. Like stories about them ones hiding in the swamps that was here before the settlers and the Indians both, and how there were circles in the swamps and big stones called altars, where them ones used to make sacrifices to what they worshipped. Grandma got some of the stories from her grandma, she said, about how them ones hid in the woods and swamps because they couldn't stand sunshine, and how the Indians kept out of their way. She said sometimes the Indians would leave some of their young people tied to trees in the forest as a sacrifice, so as to keep them contented and peaceful. Indians knew all about them, and they tried to keep white folks from noticing too much or settling too close to the hills. Them ones didn't cause much trouble, but they might if they was crowded. So the Indians give excuses for not settling, saying there weren't enough hunting and no trails, and it was too far off from the coast. Grandma told me that was why not many places were settled even today. Nothing but a few farmhouses here and there. She told me them ones were still alive, and sometimes on certain nights in the spring and fall you could see lights and hear noises far off on the tops of the hills. Grandma said I had an Aunt Lucy and an Uncle Fred who lived out there right smack in the middle of the hills. Said my pa used to visit them before he got married, and once he heard them beating on a tree drum one night along about Halloween time. That was before he met Ma, and they got married and she died when I come and he went away. I heard all kinds of stories about witches and devils and Batman that sucked your blood and haunts, about Salem and Arkham, because I never been to a city, and I wanted to hear tell how they were. About a place called Innsmouth, with old rotten houses where people hid awful things away in the cellars and the attics. She told me about the way graves was dug deep under Arkham. Made it sound like the whole country was full of haunts. She used to scare me, telling about how some of these things looked and all, but she never would tell me how them ones looked, no matter how much I asked. Said she didn't want me to have any truck with such things. Bad enough she and her kin knew as much as they did. Almost too much for decent, God-fearing people. It was lucky for me I didn't have to bother with such ideas, like my own ancestor on my father's side, Mehitabel Osborne, who got hanged for a witch back in the Salem days. So they was just stories to me until last year, when Grandma died and Judge Crabenthorpe put me on the train and I went out to live with Aunt Lucy and Uncle Fred, in the very same hills that Grandma used to tell about so often. You can bet I was pretty excited, and the conductor let me ride with him all the way and told me about the towns and everything. Uncle Fred met me at the station. He was a tall, thin man with a long beard. We drove off in a buggy from the little depot, no houses around there or nothing, right into the woods. Funny thing about those woods, they were so still and quiet. Gave me the creeps, they were so dark and lonesome. Seemed like nobody had ever shouted or laughed or even smiled in them. Couldn't imagine anyone saying anything there, except in whispers. Trees and all were so old, too. No animals around, or birds. Path kind of overgrown like nobody used it much ever. Uncle Fred drove along right fast. He didn't hardly talk to me at all, but just made that old horse hump it. Pretty soon we struck into some hills. They was awfully high ones. There was woods on them too, and sometimes a brook come running down, but I didn't see no houses, and it was always dark like at twilight wherever you looked. Lastly we got to the farmhouse, a little place, old frame house and barn in a clear space with trees all around, kind of gloomy like. Aunt Lucy came out to meet us. She was a nice sort of little middle-aged lady who hugged me and took my stuff in back. But all this don't hold with what I'm supposed to write down here. It don't matter that all this last year I was living in the house here with them, eating off the stuff Uncle Fred farmed without ever going into town. No other farms around here for almost 4 miles and no school, so evenings Aunt Lucy would help me with my reading. I never played much. At first, I was scared of going into the woods on account of what Grandma had told me. Besides, I could tell as Aunt Lucy and Uncle Fred was scared of something from the way they locked the doors at night and never went into the woods after dark, even in summer. But after a while, I got used to the idea of living in the woods, and they didn't seem so scary. I did chores for Uncle Fred, of course, but sometimes in afternoons when he was busy I'd go off by myself, particular by the time it was fall. And that's how I heard one of the things. It was early October. I was in the glen right by the big boulder. Then the noise started. I got behind that rock fast. You see, like I say, there isn't any animals in the woods, nor people, except perhaps old Cap Pritchett, the mailman, who only comes through on Thursday afternoons. So when I heard a sound that wasn't Uncle Fred or Aunt Lucy calling to me, I knew I better hide. About that sound. It was far away at first, kind of a dropping noise. Sounded like the blood falling in little spurts on the bottom of the bucket when Uncle Fred hung up a butchered hog. I looked around, but I couldn't make out nothing, and I couldn't figure out the direction the noise was from either. The noise sort of stopped for a minute, and there was only twilight and trees, still as death. Then the noise started again, nearer and louder. Sounded like a lot of people running or walking all at once, moving this way. Twigs busting under feet and scrabbling in the bushes, all mixed up in the noise. I scrunched down behind that boulder and kept real quiet. I can tell that whatever makes the noise, it's real close now, right in the glen. I want to look up, but dasn't because the sound is so loud and mean. And also, there is an awful smell like something that was dead and buried being uncovered again in the sun. All at once, the noise stops again, and I can tell that whatever makes it is real close by. For a minute, the woods are creepy still. Then comes the sound. It's a voice, and it's not a voice. That is, it doesn't sound like a voice, but more like a buzzing or croaking, deep and droning. But it has to be a voice, because it is saying words. Not words I could understand, but words. Words that made me keep my head down, half afraid I might be seen and half afraid I might see something. I stayed there sweating and shaking. The smell was making me pretty sick, but that awful, deep droning voice was worse, saying over and over something like, Ia shab nigrath, Nagyar ilyer, neb shagoth. I can't hope to spell it out the way it sounded, but I heard it enough times to remember. I was still listening when the smell got awful thick, and I guess I must have fainted, because when I woke up, the voice was gone, and it was getting quite dark. I ran all the way home that night, but not before I saw where the thing had stood when it talked, and it was a thing. No human being can leave tracks in the mud like goats' hoofs all green with slime that smell awful. Not 4 or 8, but a couple hundred. I didn't tell Aunt Lucy or Uncle Fred, but that night when I went to bed, I had terrible dreams. I thought I was back in the glen, only this time I could see the thing. It was real tall and all inky black, without any particular shape except a lot of black ropes with ends like hoofs on it. I mean, it had a shape, but it kept changing, all bulgy and squirming into different sizes. There was a lot of mouths all over the thing, like puckered-up leaves on branches. That's as close as I can come. The mouths was like leaves, and the whole thing was like a tree in the wind, a black tree with lots of branches trailing the ground, and a whole lot of roots ending in hoofs. And that green slime dribbling out of the mouths and down the legs was like sap. Next day I remembered to look in a book Aunt Lucy had downstairs. It was called A Mythology. This book told about some people who lived over in England and France in the old days, and was called Druids. They worshipped trees and thought they was alive. Maybe this thing was like what they worshipped, called a nature spirit. But these Druids lived across the ocean, so How could it be? I did a lot of thinking about it the next couple days, and you can bet I didn't go out to play in those woods again. At last I figured it out, something like this. Maybe those druids got chased out of the forests over in England and France, and some of them were smart enough to build boats and come across the ocean like old Leif Erikson is supposed to have. Then they could maybe settle in the woods back here and frighten away the Indians with their magic spells. They would know how to hide themselves away in the swamps and go right on with their heathen worshipping and call up these spirits out of the ground or wherever they come from. Indians used to believe that white gods come from out of the sea a long time ago. What if that was just another way of telling how the druids got here? Some real civilized Indians down in Mexico or South America, Aztecs or Incas, I guess, said a white god came over in a boat and taught them all kinds of magic. Couldn't he have been a druid? That would explain Grandma's stories about them ones, too. Those druids hiding in the swamps would be the ones who did the drumming and pounding and lit the fires on the hills. And they would be calling up them ones, the tree spirits or whatever, out of the earth. Then they would make sacrifices. Those druids always made sacrifices with blood, just like the old witches. Didn't Grandma tell about people who lived too near the hills disappearing and never being found again? We lived in a spot just exactly like that, and it was getting close to Halloween. That was the big time, Grandma always said. I began to wonder, how soon now? Got so scared I didn't go out of the house. Aunt Lucy made me take a tonic, said I looked peaked. Guess I did. All I know is one afternoon when I heard a buggy coming through the woods, I ran and hid under the bed. But it was only Cat Pritchett with the mail. Uncle Fred got it and come in all excited with a letter. Cousin Osborne was coming to stay with us. He was kin to Aunt Lucy, and he had a vacation, and he wanted to stay a week. He'd get here on the same train I did, the only train they was passing through these parts, on noon, October 25th. For the next few days we was all so excited that I forgot all my crazy notions for a spell. Uncle Fred fixed up the back room for Cousin Osborne to sleep in, and I helped him with the carpenter parts of the job. Days got shorter right along, and the nights was all cold with big winds. It was pretty brisk the morning of the 25th, and Uncle Fred bundled up warm to drive through the woods. He meant to fetch Cousin Osborne at noon, and it was 7 mile to the station. He wouldn't take me, and I didn't beg. Them woods was too full of creaking and rustling sounds from the wind, sounds that might be something else too. Well, he left, and Aunt Lucy and I stayed in the house. She was putting up preserves now, plums, for over the winter season. I washed out jars from the well. Seems like I should have told about them having 2 wells. A new one with a big shiny pump, close to the house. Then an old stone one out by the barn, with the pump gone. It never had been any good, Uncle Fred said. It was there when they bought the place. Water was all slimy. Something funny about it, because even without a pump, sometimes it seemed to back up. Uncle Fred couldn't figure it out, but some mornings water would be running out over the sides, green, slimy water that smelled terrible. We kept away from it, and I was by the new well till along about noon when it started in to cloud up. Aunt Lucy fixed lunch, and it started to rain hard with thunder rolling in off the big hills in the west. Seemed to me Uncle Fred and Cousin Osborne was going to have troubles getting home in the storm, but Aunt Lucy didn't fret about it, just made me help her put up the stock. Come 5 o'clock, getting dark, and still no Uncle Fred. Then we began to worry. Maybe the train was late, or something happened to the horse or buggy. 6 o'clock, and still no Uncle Fred. The rain stopped, but you could still hear the thunder sort of growling off in the hills, and the wet branches kept dripping down in the woods, making a sound like women laughing. Maybe the road was too bad for them to get through. Buggy might bog down in the mud. Perhaps they decided to stay in the depot overnight. 7 o'clock, and it was pitch dark outside. No rain sounds anymore. Aunt Lucy was awful worried. She said for us to go out and post a lantern on the fence rail by the road. We went down the path to the fence, It was dark and the wind had died down. Everything was still, like in the deep part of the woods. I felt kind of scared just walking down the path with Aunt Lucy, like something was out there in the quiet dark someplace, waiting to grab me. We lit the lantern and stood there looking down the dark road and, "What's that?" said Aunt Lucy real sharp. I listened and heard a drumming sound far away. "Horse and buggy," I said. Aunt Lucy perked up. "You're right," she says, all at once. "And it is because we see it. The horse is running fast and the buggy lurches behind it, crazy like. It don't even take a second look to see something has happened, because the buggy don't stop by the gate but keeps going up to the barn with Aunt Lucy and me running through the mud after the horse. The horse is all full of lather and foam, and when it stops it can't stand still. Aunt Lucy and I wait for Uncle Fred and Cousin Osborne to step out, but nothing happens. We look inside. There isn't anybody in the buggy at all. Aunt Lucy says, 'Oh,' in a real loud voice and then faints. I had to carry her back to the house and get her into bed. I waited almost all night by the window, but Uncle Fred and Cousin Osborne never showed up. Never. The next few days was awful. There was nothing in the buggy for a clue like to what happened, and Aunt Lucy wouldn't let me go along the road into town or even to the station through the woods. The next morning, the horse was dead in the barn, and of course we would have had to walk to the depot or all those miles to Warren's farm. Aunt Lucy was scared to go and scared to stay, and she allowed us how when Cap Pritchard comes by we had best go with him over to town and make a report and then stay there until we found out what happened. Me, I had my own ideas what happened. Halloween was only a few days away now, and maybe them ones had snatched Uncle Fred and Cousin Osborne for sacrifice. Them ones, or the Druids. The mythology book said Druids could even raise storms if they wanted to with their spells. No sense talking to Aunt Lucy, though. She was like out of her head with worry anyway, just rocking back and forth and mumbling over and over, "They're gone," and "Fred always warned me," and "No use, no use." I had to get the meals and tend to stock myself, and nights it was hard to sleep because I kept listening for drums. I never heard any, though, but still it was better than sleeping and having those dreams. Dreams about the black thing like a tree, walking through the woods and sort of rooting itself to one particular spot so it could pray with all those mouths, pray down to that old god in the ground below. I don't know where I got the idea that was how it prayed, by sort of attaching its mouths to the ground. Maybe it was an account of seeing the green slime, or had I really seen it? I'd never gone back to look. Maybe it was all in my head, the Druid story and about them ones and the voice that said, "Shoggoth," and all the rest. But then, where was Cousin Osborne and Uncle Fred? And what scared the horse so it up and died the next day? Thoughts kept going round and round in my head, chasing each other, but all I knew was we'd be out of here by Halloween night. Because Halloween was on a Thursday, and Cap Pritchard would come and we could ride to town with him. Night before, I made Aunt Lucy pack and we got all ready, and then I settled down to sleep. There was no noises, and for the first time I felt a little better. Only the dreams come again. I dreamed a bunch of men come in the night and crawled through the parlor bedroom window where Aunt Lucy slept and got her. They tied her up and took her away, all quiet in the dark, because they had cat eyes and didn't need light to see. The dreams scared me so I woke up while it was just breaking into dawn. I went down the hall to Aunt Lucy right away. She was gone. The window was wide open, like in my dream, and some of the blankets was torn. Ground was hard outside the window, and I didn't see footprints or anything, but she was gone. I guess I cried then. It's hard to remember what I did next. Didn't want breakfast. Went out hollering, "Aunt Lucy," not expecting any answer. I walked to the barn and the door was open, and the cows were gone. Saw 1 or 2 prints going out the yard and up the road, but I didn't think it was safe to follow them. Some time later I went over to the well and then I cried again because The water was all slimy green in the new one, just like the old. When I saw that, I knew I was right. Them ones must have come in the night, and they wasn't even trying to hide their doings any more, like they was sure of things. Tonight was Halloween. I had to get out of here. If them ones was watching and waiting, I couldn't depend on Cap Pritchard showing up this afternoon. I'd have to chance it down the road, and I'd better start walking now in the morning, while it was still light enough to make town. So I rummaged around and found a little money in Uncle Fred's drawer of the bureau, and Cousin Osborne's letter with the address in Kingsport he wrote it from. That's where I'd have to go. After I told folks in town what happened, I'd have some kin there. I wondered if they'd believe me in town when I told them about the way Uncle Fred had disappeared, and Aunt Lucy, and about them stealing the cattle for a sacrifice, and about the green slime in the well where something had stopped to drink. I wondered if they would know about the drums and the lights on the hills tonight, and if they was going to get up a party and come back this evening to try and catch them ones, and what they meant to call up rumbling out of the earth. I wondered if they knew what a shoggoth was. Well, whether they did or not, I couldn't stay and find out for myself, so I packed up my satchel and got ready to leave. Must have been around noon, and everything was still. I went to the door and stepped outside, not bothering to lock it behind me. Why should I, with nobody around for miles? Then I heard the noise down the road. Footsteps. Somebody walking along the road just around the bend. I stood still for a minute, waiting to see, waiting to run. Then he come along. He was tall and thin, and looked something like Uncle Fred, only a lot younger and without a beard, and he was wearing a nice city kind of suit and a crush hat. He smiled when he saw me and come marching up like he knowed who I was. "Hello, Willie," he said. I didn't say nothing. I was so confused. "Don't you know me?" he said. "I'm Cousin Osborne, your Cousin Frank." He held out his hand to shake. "But then I guess you wouldn't remember, would you? Last time I saw you, you were only a baby." "But I thought you were supposed to come last week," I said. "We expected you on the 25th. "Didn't you get my telegram?" he asked. "I had business." I shook my head. "We never get nothing here, unless the mail delivers it on Thursdays. Maybe it's at the station." Cousin Osborne grinned. "You are pretty well off the beaten track at that. Nobody at the station this noon. I was hoping Fred would come along with the buggy so I wouldn't have to walk, but no luck." "You walked all the way?" I asked. "That's right. And you come on the train?" Cousin Osborne nodded. "Then where's your suitcase?" "I left it at the depot," he told me. "Too far to fetch it along. I thought Fred would drive me back there in the buggy to pick it up." He noticed my luggage for the first time. "But wait a minute. Where are you going with a suitcase, son?" Well, there was nothing else for me to do but tell him everything that happened. So I said for him to come into the house and sit down and I'd explain. We went back in, and he fixed some coffee, and I made a couple sandwiches, and we ate. And then I told him about Uncle Fred going to the depot and not coming back, and about the horse, and then what happened to Aunt Lucy. I left out the part about me in the woods, of course, and I didn't even hint at them ones. But I told him I was scared and figured on walking to town today before dark. Cousin Osborne, he listened to me, nodding, and not saying much or interrupting. "Now you can see why we got to go right away," I said. "Whatever come after them will be coming after us, and I don't want to spend another night here." Cousin Osborne stood up. "You may be right, Willie," he said, "but don't let your imagination run away with you, son. Try to separate fact from fancy. Your aunt and uncle have disappeared. That's fact. But this other nonsense about things in the woods coming after you, that's fancy. Reminds me of all that silly talk I heard back home in Arkham, and for some reason there seems to be more of it around this time of year at Halloween. Why, when I left, 'Excuse me, Cousin Osborne,' I said, 'but don't you live in Kingsport?' 'Why, to be sure,' he told me, 'but I did live in Arkham once, and I know the people around here. It's no wonder you were so frightened in the woods and got to imagining things. As it is, I admire your bravery. For a 12-year-old, you've acted very sensibly.' 'Then let's start walking,' I said. 'Here, It is almost 2, and we better get moving if we want to make town before sundown." "Not just yet, son," Cousin Osborne said. "I wouldn't feel right about leaving without looking around and seeing what we can discover about this mystery. After all, you must understand that we can't just march into town and tell the sheriff some wild nonsense about strange creatures in the woods making off with your aunt and uncle. Sensible folks just won't believe such things. They might think I was lying and laugh at me. Why, they might even think you had something to do with your aunt and uncle's, well, leaving." "Please," I said, "we got to go right now." He shook his head. I didn't say any more. I might have told him a lot about what I dreamed and heard and saw and knew, but I figured it was no use. Besides, there were some things I didn't want to say to him now that I had talked to him. I was feeling scared again. First he said he was from Arkham, and then when I asked him, he said he was from Kingsport, but it sounded like a lie to me. Then he said something about me being scared in the woods, and how could he know that? I never told him that part at all. If you want to know what I really thought, I thought maybe he wasn't really Cousin Osborne at all. And if he wasn't, then who was he? I stood up and walked back into the hall. "Where are you going, son?" he asked. "Outside. I'll come with you." Sure enough, he was watching me. He wasn't going to let me out of his sight. He came over and took my arm, real friendly, but I couldn't break loose. No, he hung on to me. He knew I meant to run for it. What could I do? All alone in the house in the woods with this man, with night coming on, Halloween night, and them ones out there waiting. We went outside, and I noticed it was getting darker already, even in afternoon. Clouds had covered up the sun, and the wind was moving the trees so they stretched out their branches, like they was trying to hold me back. They made a rustling noise, just as if they were whispering things about me, and he sort of looked up at them and listened. Maybe he understood what they were saying. Maybe they were giving him orders. Then I almost laughed because he was listening to something, and now I heard it too. It was a drumming sound on the road. "Cap Pritchett," I said. "He's the mailman. Now we can ride to town with him in the buggy." "Let me talk to him," he says, "about your aunt and uncle. No sense in alarming him, and we don't want any scandal, do we? You just run along inside." "But Cousin Osborne," I said, "we got to tell the truth." "Of course, son, but this is a matter for adults. Now, run along. I'll call you." He was real polite about it, and even smiled, but all the same he dragged me back up the porch and into the house and slammed the door. I stood there in the dark hall, and I could hear Cap Pritchett slow down and call out to him, and him going up to the buggy and talking, and then all I heard was a lot of mumbling, real low. I peeked out through a crack in the door and saw them. Cap Pritchett was talking to him, friendly all right, and nothing was wrong, except that in a minute or so, Cap Pritchett waved, and then he grabbed the reins and the buggy started off again. Then I knew I'd have to do it, no matter what happened. I opened the door and ran out, suitcase and all, down the path and up the road after the buggy. Cousin Osborne, he tried to grab me when I went by, but I ducked around him and yelled, "Wait for me, Cap! I'm coming! Take me to town!" Cap slowed down and stared back, real puzzled. "Willie," he says, "why, I thought you was gone. He said you went away with Fred and Lucy." "Pay no attention," I said. "He didn't want me to go. Take me to town. I'll tell you what really happened. Please, Cap, you got to take me." "Sure, I'll take you, Willie. Hop right up here." I hopped. Cousin Osborne came right up to the buggy. "Here now," he said, real sharp. "You can't leave like this. I forbid it. You're in my custody." "Don't listen to him," I yelled. "Take me, Cap, please." "Very well," said Cousin Osborne. "If you insist on being unreasonable, we'll all go. I cannot permit you to leave alone." He smiled at Cap. "You can see the boy is unstrung," he said, "and I trust you will not be disturbed by his imaginings. Living out here like this, well, you understand, he's not quite himself. I'll explain everything on the way to town." He sort of shrugged at Cap and made signs of tapping his head. Then he smiled again and made to climb up next to us in the buggy seat. But Cap didn't smile back. "No, you don't," he said. "This boy Willie is a good boy. I know him. I don't know you. Looks as if you'd done enough explaining already, mister, when you said Willie had gone away. But I merely wanted to avoid talk. You see, I've been called in to doctor the boy. He's mentally unstable." "Stables be damned!" Cap spit out some tobacco juice right at Cousin Osborne's feet. "We're going." Cousin Osborne stopped smiling. "Then I insist you take me with you," he said, and he tried to climb into the buggy. Cap reached into his jacket, and when he pulled his hand out again, he had a big pistol in it. "Get down!" he yelled. "Mister, you're talking to the United States Mail, and you don't tell the government nothing, understand? Now get down before I mess your brains all over this road." Cousin Osborne scowled, but he got away from the buggy fast. He looked at me and shrugged. "You're making a big mistake, Willie," he said. I didn't even look at him. Cap said, "Gee up," and we went off down the road. The buggy wheels turned faster and faster, and pretty soon the farmhouse was out of sight, and Cap put his pistol away and patted me on the shoulder. "Stop that trembling, Willie," he said. "You're safe now. Nothing to worry about. Be in town little over an hour or so. Now you just set back and tell old Cap all about it." So I told him. It took a long time. We kept going through the woods, and before I knew it, it was almost dark. The sun sneaked down and hid behind the hills. The dark began to creep out of the woods on each side of the road, and the trees started to rustle, whispering to the big shadows that followed us. The horse was clipping and clopping along, and pretty soon there were other noises from far away. Might have been thunder and might have been something else, but it was getting nighttime for sure, and it was the night of Halloween. The road cut off through the hills now, and you could hardly see where the next turn would take you. Besides, it was getting dark awful fast. "Guess we're in for a spell of rain," Cap said, looking up. "That's thunder, I reckon." "Drums," I said. "Drums? At night in the hills you can hear them," I told him. "I heard them all this month. It's them ones getting ready for the Sabbath." "Sabbath?" Cap looked at me. "Where you hear tell about a Sabbath?" Then I told him some more about what had happened. I told him all the rest. He didn't say anything, and before long he couldn't have answered me anyway, because the thunder was all around us, and the rain was lashing down on the buggy, on the road, everywhere. It was pitch black outside now, and the only time we could see was when lightning flashed. I had to yell to make him hear me, yell about the things that caught Uncle Fred and come for Aunt Lucy, the things that took our cattle and then sent Cousin Osborne back to fetch me. I hollered out about what I heard in the woods, too. In the lightning flashes I could see Cap's face. He wasn't smiling or scowling. He just looked like he believed me, and I noticed he had his pistol out again and was holding the reins with one hand, even though we were racing along. The horse was so scared he didn't need the whip to keep him running. The old buggy was lurching and bouncing, and the rain was whistling down in the wind, and it was all like an awful dream, but it was real. It was real when I hollered out to Cap Pritchett about that time in the woods. "Shoggoth!" I yelled. "What's a shoggoth?" Cap grabbed my arm, and then the lightning come, and I could see his face with his mouth open. But he wasn't looking at me. He was looking at the road and what was ahead of us. The trees sort of come together, hanging over the next turn, and in the black it looked as if they were alive, moving and bending and twisting to block our way. Lightning flickered up again, and I could see them plain. And also something else. Something black in the road. Something that wasn't a tree. Something big and black just squatting there, waiting, with ropey arms squirming and reaching. "Shoggoth!" Cap yelled. But I could scarcely hear him, because the thunder was roaring, and now the horse let out a scream, and I felt the buggy jerk to one side, and the horse reared up, and we was almost into the black stuff. I could smell an awful smell, and Cap was pointing his pistol, and it went off with a bang that was almost as loud as the thunder, and almost as loud as the sound we made when we hit the black thing. Then everything happened at once. The thunder, the horse falling, the shot, and us hitting as the buggy went over. Cap must have had the reins wrapped around his arm, because when the horse fell and the buggy turned over, he went right over the dashboard head first, and down into the squirming mess that was the horse and the black thing that grabbed it. I felt myself falling in the dark and landing in the mud and gravel of the road. There was thunder and screaming, and another sound which I had heard once before in the woods, a droning sound like a voice. That's why I never looked back. That's why I didn't even think about being hurt when I landed. Just got up and started to run down the road fast as I could. Run down the road in the storm and the dark, with the trees squirming and twisting and shaking their heads, while they pointed at me with their branches and laughed. Over the thunder, I heard the horse scream, and I heard Cap scream too, but I still didn't look back. The lightning winked on and off, and I ran through the trees now because the road was nothing but mud that dragged me down and sucked at my legs. After a while I began to scream too, but I couldn't even hear myself for thunder. And more than thunder, I heard drums. All at once I busted clear of the woods and got to the hills. I ran up, and the drumming got louder, and pretty soon I could see regular, not just when they was lightning, because they was fires burning on the hill, and the booming of the drums come from there. I got lost in the noise, the wind shrieking and the trees laughing and the drums pounding. But I stopped in time. I stopped when I saw the fires plain, red and green fires burning in all that rain. I saw a big white stone in the center of a cleared-off space on top of the hill. The red and green fires was around and behind it, so everything stood out clear against the flames. There was men around the altar, men with long grey beards and wrinkled-up faces, men throwing awful-smelling stuff on the fires to make them blaze red and green, and they had knives in their hands, and I could hear them howling over the storm. In back, squatting on the ground, more men pounded on drums. Pretty soon something else come up the hill, 2 men driving cattle. I could tell it was our cows they drove them right up to the altar, and then the men with the knives cut their throats for a sacrifice. All this I could see in lightning flashes and in the firelights, and I sort of scooched down so I couldn't get spotted by anyone. But pretty soon I couldn't see very good anymore, on account of the way they threw stuff on the fire. It set up a real thick black smoke. When the smoke come up, the men began to chant and pray louder. I couldn't hear words, but the sounds was like what I heard back in the woods. I couldn't see too good, but I knew what was going to happen. 2 men who had led the cattle went back down the other side of the hill, and when they come up again, they had new sacrifices. The smoke kept me from seeing plain, but these was 2-legged sacrifices, not 4. I might have seen better at that, only now I hid my face when they dragged them up to the white altar and used the knives, and the fire and smoke flared up and the drums boomed and they all chanted and called in a loud voice to something waiting over on the other side of the hill. The ground began to shake. It was storming. There was thunder and lightning and fire and smoke and chanting, and I was scared half out of my wits. But one thing I'll swear to, the ground began to shake. It shook and shivered, and they called out to something, and in a minute something came. It came crawling up the hillside to the altar and the sacrifice, and it was the black thing of my dreams, that black, ropey, slimy, jelly tree thing out of the woods. It crawled up and it flowed up on its hoofs and mouths and snaky arms, and the men bowed and stood back, and then it got to the altar where there was something squirming on top, squirming and screaming. The black thing sort of bent over the altar, and then I heard droning sounds over the screaming as it come down. I only watched a minute, but while I watched, the black thing began to swell and grow. That finished me. I didn't care any more. I had to run. I got up and I ran and ran and ran, screaming at the top of my lungs no matter who heard. I kept running, and I kept screaming forever. through the woods and the storm, away from that hill and that altar. And then all at once I knew where I was, and I was back here at the farmhouse. Yes, that's what I'd done, run in a circle and come back. But I couldn't go any further. I couldn't stand the night and the storm, so I ran inside here. At first, after I locked the door, I just lay right down on the floor, all tuckered out from running and crying. But in a little while I got up and hunted me some nails and a hammer and some of Uncle Fred's boards that wasn't split up into kindling. I nailed up the door first, and then boarded up all the windows, every last one of them. Guess I worked for hours, tired as I was. When it was all done, the storm died down and it got quiet. Quiet enough for me to lie down on the couch and go to sleep. Woke up a couple hours ago. It was daylight. I could see it shining through the cracks. From the way the sun come in, I knew it was afternoon already. I'd slept through the whole morning, and nothing had come. I figured now maybe I could let myself out and make town on foot, like I'd planned yesterday. But I figured wrong. Before I got started taking out the nails, I heard him. It was Cousin Osborne, of course. The man who said he was Cousin Osborne, I mean. He come into the yard calling, "Willie!" But I didn't answer. Then he tried the door and then the windows. I could hear him pounding and cussing. That was bad. But then he began mumbling, and that was worse, because it meant he wasn't out there alone. I sneaked to look through the crack, but he already went around to the back of the house, so I didn't see him or who was with him. Guess that's just as well, because if I'm right, I wouldn't want to see. Hearing's bad enough. Hearing that deep croaking, and then him talking, and then that croaking again. Smelling that awful smell, like the green slime from the woods and around the well. The well, they went over to the well and back. And I heard Cousin Osborne say something about, "Wait until dark. We can use the well if you find the gate. Look for the gate." I know what that means now. The well must be a sort of entrance to the underground place. That's where those druid men live, and the black thing. They're out and back now, looking. I've been writing for quite a spell, and already the afternoon is going. Peeking through the cracks, I can see it's getting dark again. That's when they'll come for me, when it's dark. They'll break down the doors or the windows and come and take me. They'll take me down into the well, into the black places where the Shoggoths are. There must be a whole world down under the hills, a world where they hide and wait to come out for more sacrifices, more blood. They don't want any humans around, except for sacrifices. I saw what the black thing did on the altar. I know what's going to happen to me. Maybe they'll miss the real Cousin Osborne back home and send somebody to find out what become of him. Maybe folks in town will miss Cap Pritchard and go on a search. Maybe they'll come here and find me. But if they don't come soon, it will be too late. That's why I wrote this. It's true. Cross my heart, every word of it. And if anyone finds this notebook where I hide it, come and look down the well, the old well, out in back. Remember what I told about them ones. Block up the well and clean out them swamps. No sense looking for me if I'm not here. I wish I wasn't so scared. I'm not even scared so much for myself, but for other folks. The ones who might come after and live around here and have the same thing happen, or worse. You just got to believe me. Go to the woods if you don't. Go to the hill where they had the sacrifice. Maybe the stains are gone and the rain washed the footprints away. Maybe they got rid of the traces of the fire, but the altar stone must be there. And if it is, you'll know the truth. There should be some big round spots on that stone. Round spots about 2 feet wide. I didn't tell about that. At the last, I did look back. I looked back at the big black thing that was a Shoggoth. I looked back as it kept swelling and growing. I guess I told about how it could change shape and how big it got. But you can't hardly imagine how big or what shape, and I still dasn't tell. All I say is look. Look and you'll see what's hiding under the earth in these hills, waiting to creep out and feast and kill some more. Wait, they're coming now. Getting twilight, and I can hear footsteps. And other sounds. Voices. And other sounds. They're banging on the door. And sure enough, they must have a tree or a plank to use for battering it down. The whole place is shaking. I can hear Cousin Osborne yelling, and that droning. The smell is awful. I'm getting sick. And in a minute... Look at the altar. Then you'll understand what I'm trying to tell. Look at the big round marks 2 feet wide on each side. That's where the big black thing grabbed hold. Look for the marks and you'll know what I saw, what I'm afraid of. What's still waiting to grab you unless you shut it up forever under the earth? Black marks 2 feet wide. But they aren't just marks. What they really are is fingerprints. The door is busting up.
The Hall Bedroom by Mary Eleanor Wilkins Freeman. My name is Mrs. Elizabeth Jennings. I am a highly respectable woman. I may style myself a gentlewoman, for in my youth I enjoyed advantages. I was well brought up, and I graduated at a young ladies' seminary. I also married well. My husband was that most genteel of all merchants, an apothecary. His shop was on the corner of the main street in Rockton, the town where I was born, and where I lived until the death of my husband. My parents had died when I had been married a short time, so I was left quite alone in the world. I was not competent to carry on the apothecary business by myself, for I had no knowledge of drugs and had a mortal terror of giving poisons instead of medicines. Therefore, I was obliged to sell at a considerable sacrifice, and the proceeds, some $5,000, were all I had in the world. The income was not enough to support me in any kind of comfort, and I saw that I must in some way earn money. I thought at first of teaching, but I was no longer young, and methods had changed since my school days. What I was able to teach, nobody wished to know. I could think of only one thing to do: take boarders. But the same objection to that business as to teaching held good in Rockton. Nobody wished to board. My husband had rented a house with a number of bedrooms, and I advertised, but nobody applied. Finally, my cash was running very low, and I became desperate. I packed up my furniture, rented a large house in this town, and moved here. It was a venture attended with many risks. In the first place, the rent was exorbitant. In the next, I was entirely unknown. However, I am a person of considerable ingenuity, and have inventive power, and much enterprise when the occasion presses. I advertised in a very original manner, although that actually took my last penny, that is, the last penny of my ready money, and I was forced to draw on my principal to purchase my first supplies, a thing which I had resolved never on any account to do. But the great risk met with a reward, for I had several applicants within 2 days after my advertisement appeared in the paper. Within 2 weeks, my boarding house was well established. I became very successful, and my success would have been uninterrupted had it not been for the mysterious and bewildering occurrences which I am about to relate. I am now forced to leave the house and rent another. Some of my old boarders accompany me. Some, with the most unreasonable nervousness, refuse to be longer associated in any way, however indirectly, with the terrible and uncanny happenings which I have to relate. It remains to be seen whether my ill luck in this house will follow me into another, and whether my whole prosperity in life will be forever shadowed by the mystery of the hall bedroom. Instead of telling the strange story myself in my own words, I shall present the journal of Mr. George H. Wheatcroft. I shall show you the portions beginning on January 18th of the present year, the date when he took up his residence with me. Here it is.
January 18th, 1883. Here I am, established in my new boarding house. I have, as befits my humble means, the whole bedroom, even the whole bedroom on the 3rd floor. I have heard all my life of whole bedrooms. I've seen whole bedrooms. I've been in them, but never until now, when I'm actually established in one, did I comprehend what at once an ignominious and sternly uncompromising thing a whole bedroom is. It proves the ignominy of the dweller therein. No man of 36, my age, would be domiciled in a whole bedroom unless he were himself ignominious, at least comparatively speaking. I am proved by this means incontrovertibly to have been left far behind in the race. I see no reason why I should not live in this whole bedroom for the rest of my life. That is, if I have money enough to pay the landlady, and that seems probable, since my small funds are invested as safely as if I were an orphan ward in charge of a pillar of a sanctuary. After the valuables have been stolen, I have most carefully locked the stable door. I have experienced the revulsion which comes sooner or later to the adventurous soul who experiences nothing but defeat and so-called ill luck. I have swung to the opposite extreme. I have lost in everything. I have lost in love. I have lost in money. I have lost in the struggle for preferment. I have lost in health and strength. I am now settled down in a whole bedroom to live upon my small income and regain my health by mild potations of the mineral waters here, if possible. If not, to live here without my health, for mine is not a necessarily fatal malady, until Providence shall take me out of my whole bedroom. There is no one place more than another where I care to live. There is not sufficient motive to take me away, even if the mineral waters do not benefit me. So I am here, and to stay in the whole bedroom. The landlady is civil, and even kind as a woman who has to keep her poor womanly eye upon the main chance can be. The struggle for money always injures the fine grain of a woman. She is too fine a thing to do it. She does not by nature belong with the gold-grabbers, and it therefore lowers her. She steps from heights to claw and scrape and dig, but she cannot help it oftentimes, poor thing, and her deterioration thereby is to be condoned. The landlady is all she can be, taking her strain of adverse circumstances into consideration, and the table is good, even conscientiously so. It looks to me as if she were foolish enough to strive to give the boarders their money's worth, with a due regard for the main chance which is inevitable. However, that is of minor importance to me, since my diet is restricted. It is curious what an annoyance a restriction in diet can be, even to a man who has considered himself somewhat indifferent to gastronomic delights. There was today a pudding for dinner, which I could not taste without penalty, but which I longed for. It was only because it looked unlike any other pudding that I had ever seen, and assumed a mental and spiritual significance. It seemed to me, whimsically no doubt, as if tasting it might give me a new sensation, and consequently a new outlook. Trivial things may lead to large results. Why should I not get a new outlook by means of a pudding? Life here stretches before me most monotonously, and I feel like clutching at alleviations, though paradoxically, since I have settled down with the utmost acquiescence. Still, one cannot immediately overcome and change radically all one's nature. Now I look at myself critically, and search for the keynote to my whole self and my actions. I have always been conscious of a reaching out, an overweening desire for the new, the untried, for the broadness of further horizons, the seas beyond seas, the thought beyond thought. This characteristic has been the primary cause of all my misfortunes. I have the soul of an explorer, and in 9 out of 10 cases, this leads to destruction. If I had possessed capital and sufficient push, I should have been one of the searchers after the North Pole. I have been an eager student of astronomy. I have studied botany with avidity, and have dreamed of new flora in unexplored parts of the world, and the same with animal life and geology. I longed for riches, in order to discover the power and sense of possession of the rich. I longed for love, in order to discover the possibilities of the emotions. I longed for all that the mind of man could conceive as desirable for man, not so much for purely selfish ends as from an insatiable thirst for knowledge of a universal trend. But I have limitations. I do not quite understand of what nature, for what mortal ever did quite understand his own limitations, since a knowledge of them would preclude their existence? But they have prevented my progress to any extent. Therefore behold me in my whole bedroom, settled at last into a groove of fate so deep that I have lost the sight of even my horizons. Just at present, as I write here, my horizon on the left, that is my physical horizon, is a wall covered with cheap paper. The paper is an indeterminate pattern in white and gilt. There are a few photographs of my own hung about, and on the large wall space beside the bed there is a large oil painting, which belongs to my landlady. It has a massive tarnished gold frame, and, curiously enough, the painting itself is rather good. I have no idea who the artist could have been. It is of the conventional landscape type in vogue some 50 years since, the type so fondly reproduced in chromos. The winding river with the little boat occupied by a pair of lovers, the cottage nestled among trees on the right shore, the gentle slope of the hills and the church spire in the background. But still, it is well done. It gives me the impression of an artist without the slightest originality of design, but much of technique. But for some inexplicable reason, the picture frets me. I find myself gazing at it when I do not wish to do so. It seems to compel my attention like some intent face in the room. I shall ask Mrs. Jennings to have it removed. I will hang in its place some photographs which I have in a trunk. January 26th. I do not write regularly in my journal. I never did. I see no reason why I should. I see no reason why anyone should have the slightest sense of duty in such a matter. Some days I have nothing which interests me sufficiently to write out. Some days I feel either too ill or too indolent. For 4 days I have not written, from a mixture of all 3 reasons. Now, today, I both feel like it and I have something to write. Also, I am distinctly better than I have been. Perhaps the waters are benefiting me, or the change of air, or possibly it is something else more subtle. Possibly my mind has seized upon something new, a discovery which causes it to react upon my failing body and serves as a stimulant. All I know is, I feel distinctly better, and am conscious of an acute interest in doing so, which is of late strange to me. I have been rather indifferent, and sometimes have wondered if that were not the cause, rather than the result of my state of health. I have been so continually balked that I have settled into a state of inertia. I lean rather comfortably against my obstacles. After all, the worst of the pain always lies in the struggle. Give up, and it is rather pleasant than otherwise. If one did not kick, the pricks would not in the least matter. However, for some reason, for the last few days, I seem to have awakened from my state of quiescence. It means future trouble for me, no doubt, but in the meantime I am not sorry. It began with the picture, the large oil painting. I went to Mrs. Jennings about it yesterday, and she, to my surprise, for I thought it a matter that could be easily arranged, objected to having it removed. Her reasons were 2, both simple, both sufficient, especially since I, after all, had no very strong desire either way. It seems that the picture does not belong to her. It hung here when she rented the house. She says, if it is removed, a very large and unsightly discoloration of the wallpaper will be exposed, and she does not like to ask for new paper. The owner, an old man, is travelling abroad, the agent is curt, and she has only been in the house a very short time. Then it would mean a sad upheaval of my room, which would disturb me. She also says that there is no place in the house where she can store the picture, and there is not a vacant space in another room for one so large. So I let the picture remain. It really, when I came to think of it, was very immaterial after all. But I got my photographs out of my trunk and I hung them around the large picture. The wall is almost completely covered. I hung them yesterday afternoon, and last night I repeated a strange experience which I have had in some degree every night since I have been here, but was not sure whether it deserved the name of experience, but was not rather one of those dreams in which one dreams one is awake. But last night it came again, and now I know. There is something very singular about this room. I am very much interested. I will write down for future reference the events of last night. Concerning those of the preceding night, since I have slept in this room, I will simply say that they have been of a similar nature, but, as it were, only the preliminary stages, the prologue to what happened last night. I am not depending upon the mineral waters here as the one remedy for my malady, which is sometimes of an acute nature, and indeed constantly threatens me with considerable suffering, unless by medicine I can keep it in check. I will say that the medicine which I employ is not of the class commonly known as drugs. It is impossible that it can be held responsible for what I am about to transcribe. My mind last night, and every night since I have slept in this room, was in an absolutely normal state. I take this medicine, prescribed by the specialist in whose charge I was before coming here, regularly every 4 hours while awake. As I am never a good sleeper, it follows that I am enabled with no inconvenience to take any medicine during the night, with the same regularity as during the day. It is my habit, therefore, to place my bottle and spoon where I can put my hand upon them easily, without lighting the gas. Since I have been in this room, I have placed the bottle of medicine upon my dresser at the side of the room opposite the bed. I have done this rather than place it nearer, as once I jostled the bottle and spilled most of the contents, and it is not easy for me to replace it, as it is expensive. Therefore I placed it in security on the dresser, and indeed that is but 3 or 4 steps from my bed, the room being so small. Last night I wakened as usual, and I knew, since I had fallen asleep about 11, that it must be in the neighborhood of 3. I wake with almost clock-like regularity, and it is never necessary for me to consult my watch. I had slept unusually well and without dreams, and I awoke fully at once, with a feeling of refreshment to which I am not accustomed. I immediately got out of bed and began stepping across the room in the direction of my dresser, on which I had set my medicine bottle and spoon. To my utter amazement, the steps which had hitherto sufficed to take me across my room did not suffice to do so. I advanced several paces, and my outstretched hands touched nothing. I stopped and went on again. I was sure that I was moving in a straight direction, and even if I had not been, I knew it was impossible to advance in any direction in my tiny apartment without coming into collision either with a wall or a piece of furniture. I continued to walk, falteringly, as I have seen people on the stage. A step, then a long falter, then a sliding step. I kept my hands extended. They touched nothing. I stopped again. I had not the least sentiment of fear or consternation. It was rather the very stupefaction of surprise. "How is this?" seemed thundering in my ears. "What is this?" The room was perfectly dark. There was nowhere any glimmer, as is usually the case, even in a so-called dark room, from the walls, picture frames, looking-glass, or white objects. It was absolute gloom. The house stood in a quiet part of the town. There were many trees about. The electric streetlights were extinguished at midnight. There was no moon, and the sky was cloudy. I could not distinguish my one window, which I thought strange, even on such a dark night. Finally, I changed my plan of motion and turned, as nearly as I could estimate, at right angles. Now, I thought, I must reach soon, if I kept on, my writing table underneath the window, or, if I am going in the opposite direction, the hall door. I reached neither. I am telling the unvarnished truth when I say that I began to count my steps and carefully measure my paces after that, and I traversed a space clear of furniture at least 20 feet by 30, a very large apartment. And as I walked, I was conscious that my naked feet were pressing something, which gave rise to sensations the like of which I had never experienced before. As nearly as I can express it, it was as if my feet pressed something as elastic as air or water, which was in this case unyielding to my weight. It gave me a curious sensation of buoyancy and stimulation. At the same time, this surface, if surface be the right name, which I trod, felt cool to my feet with the coolness of vapour or fluidity, seeming to overlap the soles. Finally I stood still. My surprise was at last merging into a measure of consternation. Where am I? I thought. What am I going to do? Stories that I had heard of travellers being taken from their beds and conveyed into strange and dangerous places, middle-aged stories of the Inquisition flashed through my brain. I knew all the time that for a man who had gone to bed in a commonplace hall bedroom in a very commonplace little town, such surmises were highly ridiculous. But it is hard for the human mind to grasp anything but a human explanation of phenomena. Almost anything seemed then, and seems now, more rational than an explanation bordering upon the supernatural, as we understand the supernatural. At last I called, although rather softly, "What does this mean?" I said quite aloud, "Where am I? Who is here? Who is doing this? I tell you, I will have no such nonsense. Speak, if there is anybody here." But all was dead silence. Then suddenly a light flashed through the open transom of my door. Somebody had heard me. A man who rooms next door, a decent kind of man, also here for his health. He turned on the gas in the hall and called to me. "What's the matter?" he asked, in an agitated, trembling voice. He is a nervous fellow. Directly, when the light flashed through my transom, I saw that I was in my familiar hall bedroom. I could see everything quite distinctly. My tumbled bed, my writing table, my dresser, my chair, my little washstand, my clothes hanging on a row of pegs, the old picture on the wall. The picture gleamed out with singular distinctness in the light from the transom. The river seemed actually to run and ripple, and the boat to be gliding with the current. I gazed fascinated at it, as I replied to the anxious voice. "Nothing is the matter with me," said I. "Why?" "I thought I heard you speak," said the man outside. "I thought maybe you were sick." "No," I called back. "I'm all right. I'm trying to find my medicine in the dark, that's all. I can see now you've lighted the gas. Nothing is the matter?" "No. Sorry I disturbed you. Good night." "Good night." Then I heard the man's door shut after a minute's pause. He was evidently not quite satisfied. I took a pull at my medicine bottle and got into bed. He had left the hall gas burning. I did not go to sleep again for some time. Just before I did so, someone, probably Mrs. Jennings, came out in the hall and extinguished the gas. This morning, when I awoke, everything was as usual in my room. I wonder if I shall have any such experience tonight. January 27th. I shall write in my journal every day until this draws to some definite issue. Last night my strange experience deepened, as something tells me it will continue to do. I retired quite early, at 10:30. I took the precaution, on retiring, to place beside my bed, on a chair, a box of safety matches, that I might not be in the dilemma of the night before. I took my medicine on retiring, that made me due to wake at 2:30. I had not fallen asleep directly, but had had certainly 3 hours of sound, dreamless slumber when I awoke. I lay a few minutes hesitating whether or not to strike a safety match and light my way to the dresser, whereon stood my medicine bottle. I hesitated, not because I had the least sensation of fear, but because of the same shrinking from a nerve shock that leads one at times to dread the plunge into an icy bath. It seemed much easier to me to strike that match and cross my whole bedroom to my dresser, take my dose, then return quietly to my bed, than to risk the chance of floundering about in some unknown limbo either of fancy or reality. At last, however, the spirit of adventure, which has always been such a ruling one for me, conquered. I rose. I took the box of safety matches in my hand and started on, as I conceived, the straight course for my dresser, about 5 feet across from my bed. As before, I travelled and did not reach it. I advanced with groping hands extended, setting one foot cautiously before the other, but I touched nothing except the indefinite, unnameable surface which my feet pressed. All of a sudden, though, I became aware of something. One of my senses was saluted, nay, more than that, hailed with imperiousness, and that was, strangely enough, my sense of smell, but in a hitherto unknown fashion. It seemed as if the odour reached my mentality first. I reversed the usual process, which is, as I understand it, like this. The odour, when encountered, strikes first the olfactory nerve, which transmits the intelligence to the brain. It is as if, to put it rudely, my nose met a rose, and then the nerve belonging to the sense said to my brain, "Here is a rose." This time my brain said, "Here is a rose," and my sense then recognized it. I say rose, but it was not a rose. That is, not the fragrance of any rose which I had ever known. It was undoubtedly a flower odour, and rose came perhaps the nearest to it. My mind realized it first with what seemed a leap of rapture. What is this delight? I asked myself. And then the ravishing fragrance smote my senses. I breathed it in, and it seemed to feed my thoughts, satisfying some hitherto unknown hunger. Then I took a step further, and another fragrance appeared, which I likened to lilies for lack of something better, and then came violets, then mignonette. I cannot describe the experience, but it was a sheer delight, a rapture of sublimated sense. I groped further and further, and always into new waves of fragrance. I seemed to be wading breast-high through flower-beds of paradise, but all the time I touched nothing with my groping hands. At last a sudden giddiness as of surfeit overcame me. I realized that I might be in some unknown peril. I was distinctly afraid. I struck one of my safety matches, and I was in my whole bedroom, midway between my bed and my dresser. I took my dose of medicine and went to bed, and after a while fell asleep and did not wake till morning. January 28th. Last night I did not take my usual dose of medicine. In these days of new remedies and mysterious results upon certain organizations, it occurred to me to wonder if possibly the drug might have, after all, something to do with my strange experience. I did not take my medicine. I put the bottle as usual on my dresser, since I feared if I interrupted further the customary sequence of affairs, I might fail to wake. I placed my box of matches on the chair beside the bed. I fell asleep about 11:15, and I waked when the clock was striking 2, a little earlier than my wont. I did not hesitate this time. I rose at once, took my box of matches, and proceeded as formerly. I walked what seemed a great space without coming into collision with anything. I kept sniffing for the wonderful fragrances of the night before, but they did not recur. Instead, I was suddenly aware that I was tasting something, some morsel of sweetness hitherto unknown, and, as in the case of the odour, the usual order seemed reversed, and it was as if I tasted it first in my mental consciousness. Then the sweetness rolled under my tongue. I thought involuntarily of sweeter than honey, or the honeycomb of the Scripture. I thought of the Old Testament manna. An ineffable content, as of satisfied hunger, seized me. I stepped further, and a new savour was upon my palate, and so on. It was never cloying, though of such sharp sweetness that it fairly stung. It was the merging of a material sense into a spiritual one. I said to myself, I have lived my life, and always have I gone hungry until now. I could feel my brain act swiftly under the influence of this heavenly food, as under a stimulant. Then, suddenly, I repeated the experience of the night before. I grew dizzy, and an indefinite fear and shrinking were upon me. I struck my safety match, and was back in my whole bedroom. I returned to bed, and soon fell asleep. I did not take my medicine. I am resolved not to do so longer. I am feeling much better. January 29th. Last night to bed as usual, matches in place. Fell asleep about 11, and waked at 1:30. I heard the half-hour strike. I am waking earlier and earlier every night. I had not taken my medicine, though it was on the dresser as usual. I again took my matchbox in hand and started to cross the room, and, as always, traverse strange spaces. But this night, as seems fated to be the case every night, my experience was different. Last night I neither smelled nor tasted, but I heard. My lord, I heard. The first sound of which I was conscious was one like the constantly gathering and receding murmur of a river, and it seemed to come from the wall behind my bed where the old picture hangs. Nothing in nature, except a river, gives that impression of at once advance and retreat. I could not mistake it. On, ever on, came the swelling murmur of the waves. Past and ever past, they died in the distance. Then I heard above the murmur of the river a song in an unknown tongue, which I recognized as being unknown, yet which I understood. But the understanding was in my brain, with no words of interpretation. The song had to do with me, but with me in unknown futures for which I had no images of comparison in the past. Yet a sort of ecstasy, as of a prophecy of bliss, filled my whole consciousness. The song never ceased, but as I moved on, I came into new sound waves. There was the pealing of bells which might have been made of crystal, and might have summoned to the gates of heaven. There was music of strange instruments, great harmonies pierced now and then by small whispers as of love, and it all filled me with a certainty of a future of bliss. At last I seemed the centre of a mighty orchestra, which constantly deepened and increased, until I seemed to feel myself being lifted gently but mightily upon the waves of sound, as upon the waves of a sea. Then again the terror and the impulse to flee to my own familiar scenes was upon me. I struck my match and was back in my whole bedroom. I do not see how I sleep at all after such wonders, but sleep I do. I slept dreamlessly until daylight this morning. January 30th. I heard yesterday something with regard to my whole bedroom which affected me strangely. I cannot for the life of me say whether it intimidated me, filled me with a horror of the abnormal, or rather roused to a greater degree my spirit of adventure and discovery. I was down at the Cure, and was sitting on the veranda, sipping idly my mineral water, when somebody spoke my name. "Mr. Wheatcroft?" said the voice politely, interrogatively, somewhat apologetically, as if to provide for a possible mistake in my identity. I turned, and saw a gentleman whom I recognized at once. I seldom forget names or faces. He was a Mr. Addison, whom I had seen considerable of 3 years ago at a little summer hotel in the mountains. It was one of those passing acquaintances which signify little one way or the other. If never renewed, you have no regret. If renewed, you accept the renewal with no hesitation. It is in every way negative. But just now, in my feeble, friendless state, the sight of a face which beams with pleased remembrance is rather grateful. I felt distinctly glad to see the man. He sat down beside me. He also had a glass of the water. His health, while not as bad as mine, leaves much to be desired. Addison had often been in this town before. He had in fact lived here at one time. He had remained at the Cure 3 years, taking the waters daily. He therefore knows about all there is to be known about the town, which is not very large. He asked me where I was staying, and when I told him the street, rather excitedly inquired the number. When I told him the number, which is 240, he gave a manifest start, and after one sharp glance at me, sipped his water in silence for a moment. He had so evidently betrayed some ulterior knowledge with regard to my residence that I questioned him. "What do you know about 240 Pleasant Street?" said I. "Oh, nothing," he replied evasively, sipping his water. After a little while, however, he inquired, in what he evidently tried to render a casual tone, what room I occupied. "I once lived a few weeks at 240 Pleasant Street myself," he said. "That house always was a boarding house, I guess." "It had stood vacant for a term of years before the present occupant rented it, I believe," I remarked. Then I answered his question. "I have the whole bedroom on the 3rd floor," said I. "The quarters are pretty straitened, but comfortable enough as hall bedrooms go." But Mr. Edison had showed such unmistakable consternation at my reply that then I persisted in my questioning as to the cause, and at last he yielded and told me what he knew. He had hesitated both because he shrank from displaying what I might consider an unmanly superstition, and because he did not wish to influence me beyond what the facts of the case warranted. "Well, I will tell you, Wheatcroft," he said. "Briefly, all I know is this. When last I heard of 240 Pleasant Street, it was not rented because of foul play, which was supposed to have taken place there, though nothing was ever proved. There were 2 disappearances, and, in each case, of an occupant of the whole bedroom which you now have. The first disappearance was of a very beautiful girl, who had come here for her health and was said to be the victim of a profound melancholy, induced by a love disappointment. She obtained board at 240 and occupied the whole bedroom about 2 weeks. Then one morning she was gone, having seemingly vanished into thin air. Her relatives were communicated with. She had not many, nor friends either, poor girl, and a thorough search was made, but the last I knew she had never come to light. There were 2 or 3 arrests, but nothing ever came of them. Well, that was before my day here, but the second disappearance took place when I was in the house. A fine young fellow who had overworked in college. He had to pay his own way. He had taken cold, had the grip, and that and the overwork about finished him, and he came on here for a month's rest and recuperation. He had been in that room about 2 weeks, a little less, when one morning he wasn't there. Then there was a great hullabaloo. It seems that he had let fall some hints to the effect that there was something queer about the room. But of course the police did not think much of that. They made arrests right and left, but they never found him, and the arrested were discharged, though some of them are probably under a cloud of suspicion to this day. Then the boarding house was shut up. 6 years ago nobody would have boarded there, much less occupied that whole bedroom. But now I suppose new people have come in and the story has died out. I dare say your landlady will not thank me for reviving it." I assured him that it would make no possible difference to me. He looked at me sharply, and asked bluntly if I had seen anything wrong or unusual about the room. I replied, guarding myself from falsehood with a quibble, that I had seen nothing in the least unusual about the room, as indeed I had not, and have not now, but that may come. I feel that that will come in due time. Last night I neither saw nor heard nor smelled nor tasted, but I felt. Last night, having started again on my exploration of God knows what, I had not advanced a step before I touched something. My first sensation was one of disappointment. It is the dresser, and I am at the end of it now, I thought. But I soon discovered that it was not the old painted dresser which I touched, but something carved, as nearly as I could discover with my unskilled fingertips, with winged things. There were certainly long, keen curves of wings which seemed to overlay an arabesque of fine leaf and flower work. I do not know what the object was that I touched. It may have been a chest. I may seem to be exaggerating when I say that it somehow failed or exceeded in some mysterious respect of being the shape of anything I had ever touched. I do not know what the material was. It was as smooth as ivory, but it did not feel like ivory. There was a singular warmth about it, as if it had stood long in hot sunlight. I continued, and I encountered other objects I am inclined to think were pieces of furniture of fashions and possibly of uses unknown to me, and about them all was the strange mystery as to shape. At last I came to what was evidently an open window of large area. I distinctly felt a soft, warm wind, yet with a crystal freshness, blow on my face. It was not the window of my whole bedroom, that I know. Looking out, I could see nothing. I only felt the wind blowing on my face. Then, suddenly, without any warning, my groping hands to the right and left touched living beings, beings in the likeness of men and women, palpable creatures in palpable attire. I could feel the soft silken texture of their garments which swept around me, seeming to half enfold me in clinging meshes like cobwebs. I was in a crowd of these people, whatever they were and whoever they were, but, curiously enough, without seeing one of them, I had a strong sense of recognition as I passed among them. Now and then a hand that I knew closed softly over mine. Once an arm passed around me. Then I began to feel myself gently swept on, and impelled by this softly moving throng. Their floating garments seemed to fairly wind me about, and again a swift terror overcame me. I struck my match, and was back in my whole bedroom. I wonder if I had not better keep my gas burning tonight. I wonder if it be possible that this is going too far. I wonder what became of those other people, the man and the woman who occupied this room. I wonder if I had better not stop where I am. January 31st. Last night I saw more than I can describe, more than is lawful to describe. Something which nature has rightly hidden has been revealed to me, but it is not for me to disclose too much of her secret. This much I will say. The doors and windows open into an out-of-doors to which the outdoors which we know is but a vestibule. And there is a river. There is something strange with respect to that picture. There is a river upon which one could sail away. It was flowing silently, for tonight I could only see. I saw that I was right in thinking I recognized some of the people whom I encountered the night before, though some were strange to me. It is true that the girl who disappeared from the whole bedroom was very beautiful. Everything which I saw last night was very beautiful to my one sense that could grasp it. I wonder what it would all be if all my senses together were to grasp it. I wonder if I had better not keep my gas burning tonight. I wonder.
This finishes the journal which Mr. Wheatcroft left in his hall bedroom. The morning after the last entry, he was gone. His friend, Mr. Addison, came here, and a search was made. They even tore down the wall behind the picture, and they did find something rather queer for a house that had been used for boarders, where you would think no room would have been let run to waste. They found another room, a long, narrow one, the length of the whole bedroom, but narrower, hardly more than a closet. There was no window, nor door, and all there was in it was a sheet of paper covered with figures, as if somebody had been doing sums. They made a lot of talk about those figures, and they tried to make out that the fifth dimension, whatever that is, was proved, but they said afterward they didn't prove anything. They tried to make out then that somebody had murdered poor Mr. Wheatcroft and hid the body, and they arrested poor Mr. Addison, but they couldn't make out anything against him. They proved he was in the cure all that night and couldn't have done it. They don't know what became of Mr. Wheatcroft, and now they say 2 more disappeared from that same room before I rented the house. The agent came and promised to put the new room they discovered into the whole bedroom and have everything new, papered and painted. He took away the picture. Folks hinted there was something queer about that. I don't know what. It looked innocent enough, and I guess he burnt it up. He said if I would stay, he would arrange it with the owner, who everybody says is a very queer man, so I should not have to pay much, if any, rent. But I told him I couldn't stay if he was to give me the rent, that I wasn't afraid of anything myself, though I must say I wouldn't want to put anybody in that whole bedroom without telling him all about it, but my boarders would leave, and I knew I couldn't get any more. I told him I would rather have had a regular ghost than what seemed to be a way of going out of the house to nowhere and never coming back again. I moved, and, as I said before, it remains to be seen whether my ill luck follows me to this house or not. Anyway, it has no hall bedroom.
The Diary of a Madman, by Guy de Maupassant. He was dead, the head of a high tribunal, the upright magistrate whose irreproachable life was a proverb in all the courts of France. Advocates, young counsellors, judges had greeted him at sight of his large, thin, pale face lighted up by two sparkling, deep-set eyes, bowing low in token of respect. He had passed his life in pursuing crime and in protecting the weak. Swindlers and murderers had no more redoubtable enemy, for he seemed to read the most secret thoughts of their minds. He was dead now, at the age of 82, honoured by the homage and followed by the regrets of a whole people. Soldiers in red trousers had escorted him to the tomb, and men in white cravats had spoken words and shed tears that seemed to be sincere beside his grave. But here is the strange paper found by the dismayed notary in the desk where he had kept the records of great criminals. It was entitled, Why? 20th of June, 1851. I have just left court. I have condemned Blondel to death. No, why did this man kill his 5 children? Frequently one meets with people to whom the destruction of life is a pleasure. Yes, it should be a pleasure, the greatest of all, perhaps. For is not killing the next thing to creating? To make and to destroy? These 2 words contain the history of the universe, all the history of worlds, all that is, all. Why is it not intoxicating to kill? 25th of June. To think that a being is there who lives, who walks, who runs. A being? What is a being? That animated thing that bears in it the principle of motion and a will ruling that motion. It is attached to nothing, this thing. Its feet do not belong to the ground. It is a grain of life that moves on the earth, and this grain of life, coming I know not whence, one can destroy at one's will. Then nothing more. It perishes. It is finished. 26th of June. Why, then, is it a crime to kill? Yes, why? On the contrary, it is the law of nature. The mission of every being is to kill. He kills to live, and he kills to kill. The beast kills without ceasing, all day, every instant of his existence. Man kills without ceasing, to nourish himself. But since he needs, besides, to kill for pleasure, he has invented hunting. The child kills the insects he finds, the little birds, all the little animals that come in his way. But this does not suffice for the irresistible need to massacre that is in us. It is not enough to kill beasts. We must kill man too. Long ago, this need was satisfied by human sacrifices. Now the requirements of social life have made murder a crime. We condemn and punish the assassin, but as we cannot live without yielding to this natural and imperious instinct of death, we relieve ourselves from time to time by wars. Then a whole nation slaughters another nation. It is a feast of blood, a feast that maddens armies and that intoxicates civilians, women and children, who read by lamplight at night the feverish story of massacre. One might suppose that those destined to accomplish these butcheries of men would be despised. No, they are loaded with honors. They are clad in gold and in resplendent garments. They wear plumes on their heads and ornaments on their breasts, and they are given crosses, rewards, titles of every kind. They are proud, respected, loved by women, cheered by the crowd, solely because their mission is to shed human blood. They drag through the streets their instruments of death, that the passer-by, clad in black, looks on with envy. For to kill is the great law set by nature in the heart of existence. There is nothing more beautiful and honorable than killing. 30th of June. To kill is the law, because nature loves eternal youth. She seems to cry in all her unconscious acts, "Quick, quick, quick!" The more she destroys, the more she renews herself. 2nd of July. A human being. What is a human being? Through thought, it is a reflection of all that is. Through memory and science, it is an abridged edition of the universe whose history it represents, a mirror of things and of nations. Each human being becomes a microcosm in the macrocosm. 3rd of July. It must be a pleasure, unique and full of zest, to kill, to have there before one the living, thinking being, to make therein a little hole, nothing but a little hole, to see that red thing flow which is the blood, which makes life, and to have before one only a heap of limp flesh, cold, inert, void of thought. 5th of August. I, who have passed my life in judging, condemning, killing by the spoken word, killing by the guillotine those who had killed by the knife, I, if I should do as all the assassins have done whom I have smitten, I, who would know it? 10th of August. Who would ever know? Who would ever suspect me? Me. Especially if I should choose a being I had no interest in doing away with. 15th of August. The temptation has come to me. It pervades my whole being. My hands tremble with the desire to kill. 22nd of August. I could resist no longer. I killed a little creature as an experiment. For a beginning. Jean, my servant, had a goldfinch in a cage hung in the office window. I sent him on an errand, and I took the little bird in my hand where I felt its heartbeat. It was warm. I went up to my room. From time to time I squeezed it tighter. Its heart beat faster. This was atrocious and delicious. I was near choking it, but I could not see the blood. Then I took scissors, short nail scissors, and I cut its throat with 3 slits, quite gently. It opened its bill. It struggled to escape me, but I held it. Oh, I held it. I could have held a mad dog, and I saw the blood trickle. And then I did as assassins do, real ones. I washed the scissors. I washed my hands. I sprinkled water and took the body, the corpse, to the garden to hide it. I buried it under a strawberry plant. It will never be found. Every day I shall eat a strawberry from that plant. How one can enjoy life when one knows how. My servant cried. He thought his bird flown. How could he suspect me? Ha ha! 25th of August. I must kill a man. I must. 30th of August. It is done. But what a little thing. I had gone for a walk in the forest of Verne. I was thinking of nothing, literally nothing. A child was in the road, a little child eating a slice of bread and butter. He stops to see me pass and says, "Good day, Mr. President." And the thought enters my head, shall I kill him? I answer, "You are alone, my boy?" "Yes, sir." "All alone in the wood?" "Yes, sir." The wish to kill him intoxicated me like wine. I approached him quite softly, persuaded that he was going to run away. And suddenly I seized him by the throat. He looked at me with terror in his eyes. Such eyes! He held my wrists in his little hands, and his body writhed like a feather over the fire. Then he moved no more. I threw the body in the ditch, and some weeds on top of it. I returned home and dined well. What a little thing it was! In the evening I was very gay, light, rejuvenated. I passed the evening at the prefect's. They found me witty, but I have not seen blood. I am tranquil. 31st of August. The body has been discovered. They're hunting for the assassin. 1st of September. 2 tramps have been arrested. Proofs are lacking. 2nd of September. The parents have been to see me. They wept. 6th of October. Nothing has been discovered. Some strolling vagabond must have done the deed. If I had seen the blood flow, it seems to me I should be tranquil now. The desire to kill is in my blood. It is like the passion of youth at 20. 20th of October. Yet another. I was walking by the river after breakfast, and I saw, under a willow, a fisherman asleep. It was noon. A spade was standing in a potato field nearby, as if expressly for me. I took it. I returned. I raised it like a club, and with one blow of the edge I cleft the fisherman's head. Oh, he bled, this one. Rose-colored blood. It flowed into the water, quite gently, and I went away with a grave step. If I had been seen, I should have made an excellent assassin. 25th of October. The affair of the fisherman makes a great stir. His nephew, who fished with him, is charged with the murder. 26th of October. The examining magistrate affirms that the nephew is guilty. Everybody in town believes it. 27th of October. The nephew makes a very poor witness. He had gone to the village to buy bread and cheese, he declared. He swore that his uncle had been killed in his absence. Who would believe him? 28th of October. The nephew has all but confessed. They have badgered him so. Justice. 15th of November. There are overwhelming proofs against the nephew, who was his uncle's heir. I shall preside at the sessions. 25th of January. To death. To death. To death. I have had him condemned to death. The Advocate General spoke like an angel. Oh, yet another. I shall go to see him executed. 10th of March. It is done. They guillotined him this morning. He died very well, very well. That gave me pleasure. How fine it is to see a man's head cut off. Now I shall wait. I can wait. It would take such a little thing to let myself be caught. The manuscript contained yet other pages, but without relating any new crime. Alienist physicians to whom the awful story has been submitted declare that there are in the world many undiscovered madmen, as adroit and as much to be feared as this monstrous lunatic. If you enjoyed listening today, be sure to subscribe to the channel by hitting the red subscribe button below. After doing so, click the bell icon next to the subscribe button to receive new content notifications. If you'd like to support our work and receive exclusive perks, consider becoming a channel member by clicking the join button below. To support us in other ways, see the video description for links to our Bandcamp and Patreon pages, our merch store over at Teespring, and further information relating to our releases on Audible, iTunes, and Spotify. And until next time,